Hello everyone, I'm the Creeps Cabin. I know you use these videos to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. When I was about 12 years old, I spent a weekend at my cousin's place. He was around 9 back then. His house was in an older part of town, a neighborhood that felt like it hadn't really changed in decades. Most of the houses were one-story, some with sagging porches, paint peeling off, cracked driveways, and old vehicles parked along the narrow street. The air felt still in that area, like even the wind had gotten bored of visiting. There were weeds growing between the sidewalk cracks and chain-link fences half swallowed by bushes no one trimmed anymore. His backyard had a trampoline, one of those half-rusted ones with a few springs missing. The mat was faded from the sun, but it worked well enough. We spent most of the afternoon jumping on it, sweating under the hot, heavy air. Our feet were black with dirt and little pieces of rubber from the trampoline. We were just two dumb kids messing around, playing stupid games like who could jump the highest or land the farthest from the center. His backyard backed up to another property. Right behind his fence sat this old, abandoned house. It looked completely dead. Windows boarded up, paint peeling so bad the wood underneath was showing, and a roof that sagged like it was too tired to hold itself together. It had been there as long as my cousin could remember. No one ever came or went. The yard on that side was just tall grass, overgrown and full of who knows what. It was one of those days where you're just bored enough to make bad decisions. I don't remember which of us brought it up first. Maybe we both kind of dared each other at the same time, but soon enough, we were talking about going into that old house. It felt like something we had to do, like it was calling to us in that dumb, childish way kids think something forbidden is automatically exciting. We didn't even put on shoes. I don't know what the hell we were thinking. We just climbed the chain-link fence barefoot, careful not to cut ourselves on the top where the metal curled into little barbs. Once we dropped down on the other side, it felt like we were in another world. Everything got quieter. No birds, no cars, just that low hum in your ears when the world around you is still. There was a narrow path of hard-packed dirt between my cousin's fence and the side of the house. The siding of the old place was worn and warped. We walked slowly, wincing as the gravel and dry twigs poked into the bottoms of our feet. When we rounded the corner and came to the front of the house, that's when we saw it. The front door wasn't what we expected at all. It was a steel door. Modern, out of place. The rest of the house looked like it was from the 50s, but the door was new, with a standard knob and a deadbolt. It made no sense. Who installs a new steel door on a house that's falling apart? We tried the handle. I don't know why we expected it to be locked, but it wasn't. It just clicked and opened inward, slow and smooth like someone had oiled the hinges not long ago. The second the door cracked open, the smell hit us. It was like a slap in the face. Sweet and sour at the same time, thick and rotten. It wasn't like garbage or sewage. It was different, like old meat left in a hot room too long. We both gagged and covered our noses with our arms, but curiosity won out. We stepped inside. The air was heavy, stale. There was dust everywhere, thick on the floor and floating in the light that slanted through the few cracks in the boarded windows. It was a shotgun-style house, long and narrow. From the front door, you could see all the way to the back if the rooms weren't full of junk. The first room was cluttered, but not trashed. No graffiti, no signs of teenagers breaking into party. It almost felt like someone had been living there, but not in a normal way. There were 6 or 7 mountain bikes leaned against one wall. Some were dusty, others looked fairly new. They all seemed in working condition, like they hadn't just been dumped there. To the left was a small bathroom. We peeked in and saw an old sink with rusted faucets and a tiny mirror barely hanging on by one screw. The medicine cabinet door was open, and inside were rows of tiny glass bottles, most of them covered in grime. They had faded labels, but I could make out some of the writing, names of chemicals I didn't recognize and dates from decades ago. They looked like they belonged in a museum or some kind of apothecary display. We kept going. The second room had more junk. Old furniture, some broken picture frames, and a cassette player sitting on top of a stack of newspapers. The newspapers were yellow and brittle. The cassette was already in the player, and someone had written on the label in neat black ink, Deborah, March 18th, 1993. We didn't really think too much of it. I remember glancing at it, wondering briefly what might be on the tape, but we didn't press play. There was something about that house that made us feel like we were on borrowed time, like we weren't supposed to be there, and the house knew it. The third room had more bikes, 2 more, I think, and a big pile of clothes in one corner, just dumped there like someone had swept them off a bed and left them. A small closet door was cracked open, and it was completely dark inside. We pushed it open and felt cobwebs brush against our faces. The air inside the closet felt colder somehow. Inside was a chainsaw, old and heavy looking. It sat on the wooden floor of the closet, angled weirdly like it had been dropped. There was residue on the blade, reddish-brown. We froze. Both of us stared at it without saying a word. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. We stood there too long, both of us trying to make sense of it. Risht. It's just rust, I told myself. We didn't want to look too closely. I remember saying something like, let's just look in the last room real quick, even though neither of us wanted to. I don't know why we kept going. It was like we had to finish what we started. The last room was almost completely empty. Just walls, dust, and an old wooden cross propped up in the center, like someone had stuck it there on purpose. It looked handmade, uneven and splintered, painted white once but now chipped and faded. Words were painted across it in black, shaky lettering. Deborah, September 29, 1963 to March 18, 1993. That's when it clicked. The cassette. Same date. We both just stood there, staring at the cross. The room was so quiet we could hear each other breathing. The air felt colder here, not like air-conditioned cold, but deep, damp cold like being inside a cave. Then we heard it. A thump. It came from the basement. We hadn't even noticed the basement door in the corner at first. It was slightly ajar, and beyond it were wooden stairs disappearing into darkness. The thump wasn't loud, but it was enough. It didn't sound like something falling. It sounded deliberate, heavy, like someone shifting their weight. We didn't speak. We just turned and ran. We ran straight through the house, past the cassette, past the bikes, past the rusted sink and the sweet, awful smell, out the steel door and into the sunlight. We sprinted down the narrow dirt path, scraping our toes on rocks and broken twigs, barely even noticing the pain. We scrambled over the fence, probably cutting ourselves, but we didn't care. We tore across my cousin's backyard, through the back door, up the stairs, into his room, and dove under the bed. Our hearts felt like they were about to explode. For the next few hours, we just lay there, whispering, speculating, trying to understand what the hell we had just seen. We didn't even know how long we were hiding. We stayed under there until the sun went down and the light in the room turned orange. We promised never to go back. We meant it too. We were shaken. Whatever was in that basement, we didn't want to know. But of course, we did go back eventually. That's another story, one I'm not sure I'm ready to tell. Years went by. I grew up. I moved away. That summer faded into memory, like most things from childhood. Sometimes I'd remember that day randomly, usually late at night, when I couldn't sleep, when my mind wandered to dark places. I'd think about the smell, the bikes, the name on the cassette, and the cross. Then, just yesterday, I went back to visit my cousin for the first time in years. We were talking and catching up, and eventually the conversation drifted to that house. Without saying anything, we both just got up and walked to the backyard. The trampoline was gone now, replaced with a garden. The fence was still there, just older. We climbed it, but the house was gone. There was just an empty lot where it used to be. Some weeds, some gravel, but no sign that a house had ever been there. No foundation, no stairs, no debris, just open space. I don't know what happened to it. Maybe the city tore it down. Maybe someone bought the land and cleared it. I don't know. But standing there, barefoot again like an idiot, I felt two things at the same time, disappointment and relief. Disappointed that I couldn't prove to myself it had all been real. That maybe my memory had twisted it into something bigger, scarier over time. But also relief that it was gone. That whatever had been there, or whoever, was buried under fresh dirt. I stood there for a long time. My cousin eventually went back inside, but I stayed, watching the wind blow through tall weeds in the late afternoon light. I couldn't help but feel like the ground itself was holding a secret, like it knew what we saw and wasn't telling. And maybe that's for the best. It was freshman year, late fall. The days were getting shorter, colder. Most nights, people stayed inside, tucked away in dorm lounges or study halls, but I liked walking at night. It helped clear my head. That particular night, my friend Evan had just gotten dumped. His girlfriend, Katie, had ended things earlier that day, and he was spiraling. I didn't know what to do, really. I wasn't great with emotional stuff, but I figured walking around campus, talking, just getting him out of the dorm room might help. The air was sharp, not freezing, but enough to sting the skin. The quad was mostly empty except for the occasional late class straggler or someone heading to a dorm. We circled the usual spots, around the library, past the cafeteria, and eventually our steps took us toward the west side of campus, where the older buildings were. That part of campus always had a strange energy. Most students avoided it, especially at night. There was this one building in particular, Hadley Hall. Hadley was different from the rest. The architecture was older, more Gothic, with tall, narrow windows and red bricks that had blackened over time. Vines had crept up most of the walls, and part of the roof was sunken in from years of neglect. It had once been a dorm, long before our time, but no one lived there anymore. The university had sealed it off after years of disrepair and rumors. Lots of rumors. People said 2 girls had died in their years apart. One murdered by her boyfriend, stabbed in a room on the 2nd floor. The other, a suicide, hung herself in her room on the 1st floor. The weird thing was, both incidents happened in the same corner of the building. Different rooms, but nearly the same spot, diagonally across from each other. It wasn't university-sanctioned history, but enough people talked about it that everyone knew the story. I didn't believe in that kind of thing, not really. I think that's why I brought it up when we passed the building that night. I figured talking about something creepy, something outside of Evan's personal drama, might distract him. So I pointed toward Hadley and said something like, "Ever wonder why that place still gives people the creeps?" and started telling him the old stories. We wandered up toward the building, close enough to see the long hallway through the large window near the front entrance. The building had a symmetrical layout, 2 doors on either end and one long hallway stretching between them. The lights were out, but the moonlight was strong that night, and it filtered in through the windows just enough for us to see. We were standing there, looking in, when 2 girls stepped out of a room down the hall. It caught us both off guard because we hadn't seen anyone go in. They weren't talking, just standing in the hall, looking at each other. Something about the way they were dressed didn't make sense. They had these old clothes, jeans that flared at the bottom, baggy sweaters. One of them had shoulder-length feathered hair like people wore in the 70s or 80s. They just stood there, silent. Then, the one on the left slowly turned her head toward us. It was a slow, unnatural movement, like she was straining to do it, like her neck didn't want to turn. She didn't say anything, didn't move, just stared at us for a few seconds. Then she turned her head back to the other girl, and both of them turned and walked away, toward the opposite door. Evan and I just looked at each other. No words, just that shared feeling of what the hell did we just see. Then we took off running toward the other end of the building, toward the other entrance, thinking maybe we could catch them as they exited. But the path was quiet. We circled the far side. No sign of them. Nobody came out. There were no lights, no sounds. So we went back to the original window, half convinced we imagined it. And when we looked in again, they were there. Same room, same hallway, same weird moment frozen in time. One girl turned her head again, slowly, looked directly at us, turned back, and walked away like before. That was it. We bolted. Didn't say a word. Just ran. I barely slept that night. At one point, around 3 a.m., I woke up to a loud noise in my dorm room. All my posters, every single one, had fallen off the walls. Not 1 or 2, not curled tape. They were all down. I sat up in the dark, trying to make sense of it. I told myself the tape just gave out. Maybe the air had gotten too cold. Maybe I was just freaking myself out because of what happened earlier. But it didn't feel like coincidence. It felt targeted. A few days later, I was telling another friend about what happened. He didn't believe it, of course, and dared me to go back. Said it was probably just a couple of girls messing with us. And stupidly, I agreed. I felt like I had to prove it to myself that it was nothing. We went at night. Brought flashlights, though we didn't use them right away. When we got to Hadley, everything looked the same. Dead grass around the foundation. Empty windows. Still, we walked the length of the building, testing doors and windows. Most were locked, but one wasn't. It was an old sliding window near the bottom right side of the building. We pushed it open, and the metal creaked louder than I expected. I climbed in first. It was a small room, dusty, with peeling paint and an old twin mattress on the floor. The air inside was stale and heavy, like it hadn't moved in years. Later, after we left, I learned that was the room where the girl had hung herself. We moved slowly down the hallway, keeping close to the walls. The building smelled like mold and old carpet. Every step felt like it echoed too loudly. The floor creaked in strange places, sometimes when we weren't even stepping on it. At first, nothing happened. Just a dark, forgotten dorm, left to rot. We peeked into old rooms, most of them empty. A few still had beds and desks. Some had piles of paper, leftover textbooks, random garbage left behind. But the longer we stayed in there, the more the feeling started to change. The first weird thing was the faucet. We heard water running faintly from a nearby bathroom. We followed the sound and found a sink running at full blast. The handle was rusted, but we managed to shut it off. We figured maybe some pipe pressure just loosened it. But as we walked away, we heard another one, then another. We walked through the hallway, passing room after room, and more water sounds followed. Bathroom sinks, showers, one even sounded like a tub filling. We turned back, trying to trace them, but the sounds kept shifting, always one step ahead or behind. Then we passed a room we'd just been in, and something had changed. A chair that had been at the desk was now turned toward the center of the room, just sitting there, facing us. Neither of us touched it. On the first floor, under the main staircase, we found a desk flipped upside down. It hadn't been there when we came through the first time. It looked like someone had lifted it and dropped it. There were scratches on the wall, and pieces of chipped wood near the floor. I couldn't explain it, but it was starting to feel like the building was reacting to us. We decided it was time to leave. We weren't panicking yet, but we weren't calm either. When we got back to the room with the open window, it felt like the whole building had tensed up. The air felt heavier. We both moved fast, not quite running, but definitely not strolling. We stepped into the room, and just as we reached for the window, the door behind us slammed shut. Hard. Not a draft. Not slow. It slammed like someone had kicked it closed. I jumped so hard I nearly dropped the flashlight. We yanked the door open. It wasn't locked, but it resisted for a moment like something was holding it back, then dove out through the window and didn't stop running until we were halfway across campus. We didn't go back. Ever. After that, things got quiet again. No more poster incidents. No more strange feelings. I tried not to think about it too much, buried myself in classes and work. But sometimes, when I walked past that side of campus during the day, I'd look toward Hadley Hall and feel that same cold prickle under my skin. That sensation like something was aware of me, watching. Over time, people stopped talking about it. The building stayed empty. A few years later, the university announced plans to tear it down, said it was structurally unsound. I never found out if they actually did. I never went back to check. And maybe that's for the best. It started the way most unexpected things do, with no plan and no warning. I hadn't been looking for another cat. My older cat, Maisie, was already temperamental and deeply set in her ways. She hated other animals, hated people who smelled like other animals, and generally acted like the queen of a very small, very specific kingdom. My apartment and only my apartment. She barely tolerated me, but she tolerated me enough. She was my constant, my grumpy shadow. So I really wasn't looking for another cat. But then I found her. I was walking home from work, cutting through the alleyway behind a line of old houses where people left food scraps out for strays. Something small darted across the cracked pavement and into a cluster of bushes by the fence. I paused, maybe out of habit, maybe out of curiosity. It was getting dark, and I was tired, but something about the flicker of motion had grabbed me. I crouched near the bush, and that's when I saw her. She was skin and bones, but even in that pathetic, fragile shape, she was beautiful. A snowshoe Blue Point Siamese. Huge eyes, too big for her small face. Delicate little paws. Her coat was dusty and matted in places, but the pattern was still clear, like melted cream over gray velvet. She didn't look at me with fear. She looked at me like she'd been waiting. I went home and brought back a can of tuna and a towel. That was all it took. She didn't even run when I picked her up. She just looked at me, quiet and still, as if she knew this was it. Her ride out. I named her Penelope. Pep for short. I fell in love with her fast. It was impossible not to. Pep wasn't just cute, she was funny. She had this habit of sitting with one paw hanging down off the edge of the couch, like she was driving an invisible sports car. She would curl into the tightest little ball to sleep, then suddenly sprawl out like she had no bones. She would do things that made me laugh when I didn't even want to smile. Her favorite trick was high five. I'd hold out my hand and say it, and she'd tap my palm with hers, slow and careful, then immediately sit back and wait for her treat. She started doing it without being asked. If I was holding a snack, or she just wanted attention, she'd silently hold her little paw up, waiting. High five became her signature move. But Maisie didn't adjust. Not even after 3 months. Every day was tension. Hissing. Growling. Pep never fought back. She always backed down, always slinked away. It got to the point where Maisie stopped eating. Stopped using the litter box. Started hiding from me. She was miserable, and I couldn't do that to her. I'd had her for 8 years. She was old, and this was her space. Pep was young, adaptable, and so full of life. She deserved more than tiptoeing around someone else's territory. I didn't want to give her up. God, I didn't. I cried over it. I put it off. I second-guessed myself 100 times. But in the end, I gave her to my friend Lisa, someone I trusted completely. Lisa had cats before. Her place was calm, quiet, full of soft blankets and window sunspots. It would be good for Pep. And it was. Lisa sent me pictures. Pep curled up in a knit basket. Pep pawing at birds through the window. Pep knocking pencils off Lisa's desk with that same mischief in her eyes. I missed her like a phantom limb. I missed her lightness. But I knew she was okay. Then came the text. I'm just gonna pretend you didn't know about this. A picture followed. For kittens. Pep had been pregnant when I found her. Just too skinny to tell. There were 2 gray girls, a black boy, and 1 little blue tuxedo boy who looked almost exactly like her, just darker. I stared at that picture for a long time. It felt like I couldn't breathe. I had to keep him. I named him Pepin. He came home to me at 7 weeks old. I was terrified that Maisie would go through the same rejection process, but somehow she didn't. Maybe because he was a kitten. Maybe because he wasn't Pep. Maybe because she was just too tired to fight anymore. Whatever the reason, she allowed it. From the very beginning, Pepin felt familiar. Not in the way that all kittens are a little silly and curious and loving. No, this was different. He moved the way Pep had moved. He had her strange sleeping positions. He walked the same path she used to take through the apartment, stopping at the same spots, staring at the same things. He had her eyes. I don't mean the color or the shape, though they were similar. I mean the way he looked at me. The way his eyes held mine like he was trying to tell me something. And then there were the toys. I hadn't touched them after she left. They sat in the basket by the couch. When Pepin came home, he ignored everything except one old crinkly mouse. The one Pep had carried around like a trophy. He batted it down the hall the same way she had. He even chirped the same way when he caught it. I told myself it was genetics. That this was what people meant when they said personality could be inherited. But something in me didn't buy it. Still, I kept going. Life resumed its rhythm. I got used to the sound of his feet on the tile. Got used to seeing that little blue tux blur out of the corner of my eye. He became part of my life as seamlessly as if he'd always been there. Then, one night, Lisa called. She was crying. I didn't catch everything she said at first, just fragments. Road. Pep. Car. My stomach dropped out of me. Pep had gotten out. A window left cracked in the kitchen, maybe. She'd never tried to escape before, but that night she did. Lisa found her by the curb the next morning. Already cold. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I hung up, curled onto the floor with Pepin beside me, and just cried until I couldn't anymore. I wasn't prepared for the weight of it. It felt like losing her all over again, except this time it was permanent. Final. I'd lost my chance to see her again. I would never bury my face in her fur, never hear that tiny chirp, never get another slow blink of trust. I barely slept. I didn't eat. The next morning, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, eyes swollen, head pounding. Then Pepin jumped onto the bed. He'd never done that before. He usually stayed in the cat tree until I got up. He sat there, right by my side, quiet, and then he raised his paw. High five. He held it in the air, waiting. I didn't move. I couldn't. My throat closed. My chest hurt. I reached up and met his paw with mine, hand to paw. We held there for a moment, and then he dropped it, turned in a circle, and curled up against me. I had never taught him that. Pep only did high five for me, never Lisa. He'd never seen her do it. He never did it again. But that morning, he knew. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe somehow he saw it once. Maybe I talked about it in front of him, and he picked it up. But I knew that wasn't it. I tried to teach him the trick later, just out of curiosity. He refused. Would sit and stare at me like I was asking him to bark or juggle. He'd learned to sit, to fetch, to roll over. He loved tricks. But not that one. Just once. Just that morning. It wasn't a trick. It was a message. I started to think back on all the little things. The way he waited by the door when I came home. The way he pawed at my cheek in the middle of the night. The way he seemed to know the routine before he ever learned it. The way he fit into my arms like a missing puzzle piece. The way he looked at me. I'm not religious. I don't believe in reincarnation or spirits or anything that goes bump in the night. But Pep was smart. Smarter than most animals I'd known. And she was soft and sweet and careful. She loved me in that quiet way cats do when they really trust you. Sometimes I wonder if she knew she wouldn't be around long, that the road ahead was short, too short. And maybe, just maybe, she found a way to stay a little longer. I don't say these things out loud. People would laugh or pity me. They'd say it's projection, grief, coincidence. And maybe it is. But I live with him. I see it every day. I see her. I know I'll never have her again. Not really. But there's something about the way Pepin moves through the world, the way he feels like an echo, a shadow cast by a memory that never faded. He doesn't high-five. He never will. But every once in a while, he curls up beside me, looks up with those huge blue eyes, and in that look, I see her again. And I believe in the quiet, in the ordinary, in the tiny spaces where love lives, that somehow she stayed. And that maybe is enough. The air was cool and heavy the way it often is in the Irish countryside in late autumn. That kind of quiet that makes everything sound sharper. The crunch of boots on damp leaves, the occasional distant bleat of a sheep, the wind whispering through the trees. Me and my mate had decided to go for a walk behind the old castle ruins, just as the sun was dipping. The kind of dusk that creeps up slowly, turning everything to shades of gray before you realize it's actually dark. We weren't out for any real reason, just boredom. The kind of boredom you get when you've spent too many evenings sitting around the same kitchen table with the same cups of tea and the same tired jokes. The castle grounds stretched for acres behind the old stone structure, scattered with patches of mossy grass, winding trails, small wooded spots, and the odd ancient structure. It was a familiar walk, one we'd done a dozen times before. But this time was different because earlier that day, we'd taken acid. Not just a little bit, either. We hadn't really planned it. It just happened, like most stupid decisions. Someone we knew had some, and we figured it would be a bit of crack, just something to make the afternoon more interesting. It hit harder than I expected. By the time we reached the castle grounds, everything was sharper, more vivid. Colors had depth, and sounds had texture. The clouds seemed to breathe. Every sound felt like it carried meaning. As the light faded, we were moving slower. I could feel the pull of the place more than usual. Every crumbling wall and broken arch looked like it was watching. Trees looked like they were leaning in slightly. I kept reminding myself it was the acid, but it didn't help much. We walked a little further past a narrow, muddy path that curved around some old stone walls half swallowed by ivy. That's when we passed the well. It sat just off to the side, behind a cluster of small trees with bare, crooked limbs. I'd seen it before, just a circular ring of stones maybe 3 feet across, half collapsed in places, probably dry at the bottom. No one paid it much attention, but as we passed, something caught my eye. A flicker of light, or movement, just barely noticeable. I slowed down. My friend hung back a little. He was looking at the trees, probably thinking they were breathing or something, but I kept moving, drawn in. There was a weird heaviness to the space around the well, like the air was thicker there. My boots squelched quietly in the damp grass as I approached. I leaned slightly over the edge, peering into the black circle. At first, I didn't see anything, just black. Then I blinked, and something shifted. There were eyes, 2 yellow eyes staring straight up at me, unblinking, wide and round like a cat's, but definitely human. Below them, a mouth, grinning, thin, stretched lips and pale skin. Her hair was soaked, hanging down in dark clumps, framing her face like seaweed clinging to a rock. She didn't move, just stared. The smile didn't look kind or playful. It looked wrong. Too wide, too calm. I froze. My body locked. I couldn't even breathe properly. Just stood there, staring back, trying to understand what the hell I was looking at. My brain couldn't catch up. I backed away slowly at first, then turned and ran. We both ran. I didn't even tell him what I saw right then. We just ran. Neither of us said anything. No reason. Just instinct. We ran until we hit a gravel path that curved back toward the village and slowed to catch our breath. I could still feel it, her, whatever it was, in my chest like a weight. We walked in silence for a while after that, the path winding through dark patches of trees. The wind had picked up a little, brushing the branches together overhead. A few times I thought I heard something behind us, like soft footsteps, but I kept telling myself it was just the wind, or an animal. We cut through the old graveyard on the edge of the grounds. It was a small place, half forgotten, stones leaning at odd angles, names worn away by time. Some of the graves had old Celtic crosses, others were just slabs of moss-covered stone. As we stepped between two broken headstones, I glanced up and stopped dead in my tracks. She was there again, sitting up in the branches of a dead tree just beyond the fence line. Perched like a bird, legs hanging over a thick branch, arms draped around the trunk. Staring straight at us. The same pale face, the same yellow eyes, the same grin. Only this time, my friend saw her too. I know because we both backed away at the same time. No words, just movement. I looked at him. His face was pale and tight, mouth drawn. He looked how I felt, sick with fear, confusion buzzing behind his eyes. But neither of us asked the other to explain. We walked faster after that. The fear had sunk in deep by now, and we both had the same feeling crawling along our spines, that we were being followed. That whatever this girl was, or whatever we thought she wasn't done with us. The rest of the night passed in strange, broken pieces, the kind of hours that slipped by without making sense. We ended up walking miles, aimlessly, trying to outrun something that stayed behind our backs no matter how far we went. We went under a small stone bridge that cut through the base of a hill a few miles outside the village. It was a place we knew, but it felt alien that night. The way the stone caught the moonlight, the way the echo of our footsteps bounced off the walls. As we stepped under the arch, I saw her again. She was standing at the far end, still, facing us, barefoot, hair clinging to her face, head tilted slightly like she was curious. And then she moved, slowly, one foot in front of the other, steady and unhurried. We bolted again, climbing up the side of the hill through brambles and slick mud, our breathing ragged and fast. I tripped once and hit my knee on a rock, but I barely felt it. We didn't stop moving until we were back in the edge of the village, near the first row of cottages. The thing is, it wasn't just fear anymore. It was something worse. Confusion. We both knew we'd taken acid. We weren't that far gone. But this was shared. Exactly the same. No difference in what we were seeing. And there was no cue from me to him, or from him to me. I didn't say anything about the girl in the well, and he didn't say anything about seeing her in the graveyard. We both just saw her. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on my bed in the dark, every sound in the house exaggerated, every shadow a little too deep. I kept expecting to see her standing outside the window, but she didn't come again. The next day, things started to come back into focus. My head was clearer. Food tasted real again. The air felt lighter. I met up with my friend in the afternoon, and we just sat by the water behind his place for a long time. Eventually, he turned and said out of nowhere, "You know that well?" I nodded, but didn't say anything. He said, "I saw a girl in there. Yellow eyes. Smiling. That was it." That's when I told him I saw the same thing. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. It wasn't some trippy image that could be brushed off. It was precise. The same. And that's what stuck with me. Even now, years later, I can still see her face. The grin. The way she moved, slow and calm like she had all the time in the world. It never felt like a ghost story or some legend passed down. It felt real. Not real in the literal sense, but real in the way trauma sticks to you. Like an imprint. I've read since then about shared hallucinations. It happens, apparently. Psychedelics open up parts of the brain that process sensory information in strange ways. And when two people are in the same space, under the same influence, with similar expectations or environments, they can sometimes see the same thing. The mind makes patterns. Faces. Figures. I understand all that. But logic doesn't erase the memory. and I've never gone near that well again. I moved into this house during the tail end of winter. The air was still sharp with cold in the mornings, and by late afternoon the sun dipped too early below the rooftops. I'd been looking for a place for months, somewhere quiet, affordable, and with enough room to stretch out and finally unpack years' worth of my life that had been boxed up and shuffled between rentals. When I first saw the listing, I thought it was a mistake. The price was low for what it offered: 3 bedrooms, a fenced yard, an attached garage, and a small basement. Too good to be true, really. The house sat at the end of a short street, tucked between 2 empty lots that had once been homes before being torn down. The neighbors on either side were distant enough to not feel intrusive, but close enough to hear if I ever needed help. It was old, built in the early 1940s, with creaky floorboards and a narrow staircase. The walls still bore the original molding, slightly warped with age, and the whole place had the faint smell of dust and wood polish baked in over decades. I didn't mind the age, it gave it character. I signed the lease the same day I toured it. Moving in was a slow process. Between work and the weather, I could only haul a few boxes at a time. On my first night, I didn't even have my bed upstairs yet. The living room floor was scattered with half-unpacked boxes, folded blankets, and leftover takeout. I laid out an old futon mattress I'd found rolled up in my storage unit and set up a small lamp in the corner for light. My body ached from moving furniture, and my arms were sore from carrying heavy boxes, so I just wanted to relax. It was a weird feeling, being in a new house with nothing familiar around. The walls didn't feel like mine yet. They still felt like they belonged to someone else. I tried to ignore it, distracting myself by watching videos on my phone. That background noise helped me not notice how quiet the house really was. Not just quiet like no one's talking, but quiet like the air was thick, heavy, like sound didn't travel properly inside the walls. I lay there, half listening to a video, scrolling through my feed with the brightness turned low, when something strange happened. I got that pins and needles feeling. You know the one, when your foot falls asleep and the tingling spreads until you shake it out. But it wasn't my foot. It was the top of my head. The crown, to be exact. Like something cold and electric had touched it. At first I thought maybe something fell on me, like a draft or a small bug. I reached up, felt nothing, but the feeling was so specific. It wasn't random. It wasn't my whole head. It was a perfect shape. A hand. Not pressing down, not pulling hair, just resting. The weight was light, but distinct. Like someone had placed their hand on my scalp gently, with all 5 fingers spread out. I froze for a moment, not breathing, not moving. My body was buzzing, heart starting to pick up speed, but I didn't panic. I just lay there and waited. After about 10 seconds, the sensation faded, gone like a breeze. I didn't know what else to do, so I mumbled good night into the air, more out of reflex than belief, turned off my lamp, and pulled the blanket up to my chin. The rest of the night was still. I drifted in and out of sleep, not deeply, but enough to feel time pass. I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. But when I woke up around 7, sunlight leaking through the crooked blinds, I noticed something small. The closet door across the room was open. Just a crack, maybe 4 inches. I hadn't opened it. In fact, I was sure I hadn't even looked inside that closet yet. My moving boxes were stacked in front of it when I laid out the futon. I sat up, feeling the stiffness in my neck and shoulders, and stared at it for a long moment. No wind in the room. No pets. Just me. The rest of the day was a blur of unpacking, building furniture, and shoving things into their new places. I told myself the closet probably wasn't latched properly and had slowly swung open overnight. I even checked the hinges. They creaked when I moved them, like they hadn't been used in a long time. Still, it bothered me. Not because of the door, but because of how specific that pins and needles sensation was. I tried to ignore it, but the house didn't let me. It started with small things, little noises I couldn't explain. I'd be upstairs organizing shelves, and I'd hear something shift downstairs. Not the house settling, actual movement. I'd go down, thinking maybe something toppled or I left a window open, but everything would be in place. Once, I heard the sound of something metal clatter. I rushed to the kitchen, heart racing, and found nothing out of place. But then I opened the silverware drawer. The big carving knife that I had placed carefully in the back corner slot, sideways, because it didn't fit anywhere else, was now at the front. sitting perfectly where the forks usually go. That happened again the next day, and the day after. The first few times I thought maybe I was tired, disorganized, but I started keeping track, even took pictures with my phone. Something or someone was moving my silverware around. The drawer never opened by itself while I was watching, but I'd leave the kitchen, come back a few minutes later, and hear the tail end of a noise. A faint rattle, like utensils settling. One time I stood silently around the corner and waited. After a minute, I heard a soft tink, like someone tapped a spoon against a knife. And when I looked again, the drawer was still shut, but when I opened it, the teaspoons were in the butter knife slot. It was just weird. It wasn't scary, not yet, just unsettling. Like living with a roommate who moved things around, but never said anything. But what really messed with me were the footsteps. The house was all hardwood floors except for the bedrooms, which had old, thin carpet. At night, when I was in bed upstairs, I'd sometimes hear creaking from the hallway. Not constant, not loud, but slow, like someone pacing. At first I thought it might be pipes, or maybe the house shifting. But I'd lived in enough old buildings to know that sounds like those are usually random. This wasn't. The pattern was too human. Step, step, pause, step. I got used to sleeping with one ear open. Eventually I left the hallway light on every night, just to feel a little more in control. I never saw anyone, never heard a door open, just that slow, steady rhythm. A few weeks in, I started checking the floors each morning for dust prints or scuffs, but nothing ever showed. It was like whoever was walking never touched the ground. One night, I couldn't sleep. The footsteps were louder than usual, and they didn't stop. They just kept going. I lay there with my eyes closed, blanket pulled tight, pretending I didn't care, trying not to listen. But at some point, the steps stopped right outside my door. The floorboard outside my room has a very specific creak. I know it because I step on it every morning when I go to brush my teeth. That night, I heard it. One single creak. Then silence. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, nothing was out of place. No doors open, no drawers messed with. But I started locking my bedroom door at night, just in case. Even though I was alone, it wasn't all the time. Some nights were totally quiet. Some weeks passed with nothing strange happening. But just when I started to feel comfortable, something would remind me that I wasn't really alone in the house. Once, I was brushing my teeth and heard my name. Just once. Soft. Not whispered, but not loud either. Like someone said it from another room. I spat the toothpaste into the sink and stood there, heart hammering. I walked through every room. Checked the yard. Nothing. After that, I stopped using headphones in the house. I wanted to hear everything, even the things I didn't want to hear. The weirdest part is how normal it became. After a few months, the little disturbances stopped scaring me. They just became part of the house. I even started speaking out loud, not in fear, but out of habit. Like, all right, leave the knives where they belong. Or not tonight, I'm too tired for footsteps. And it worked. Sort of. Things calmed down. The drawer stayed organized. The pacing slowed. The light in the hallway stayed on. I still heard creaks now and then, and the closet door opened on its own once in a while, but I stopped reacting. I stopped treating it like something to be afraid of. The hand on my head never came back. That only happened once. I still don't know what to make of that. I've tried explaining it to people, but most just laugh or say I must have been dreaming. But I was wide awake. I remember every second of that night. I don't think I'm in danger. Whatever's here isn't trying to hurt me. It's more like it's just curious. Like I moved into its space, and it's been slowly deciding whether to accept me. And maybe it has. Maybe that first night was just its way of checking me out. I've been here over a year now. No one else has seen or heard anything, even when I've had friends stay over. The weirdness seems reserved just for me, which makes it even harder to explain. But the truth is, I don't need to explain it anymore. I've stopped trying to figure it out. The house is old. Maybe it holds on to things, memories, routines, people. Maybe not in a ghostly way, but in a human way. Maybe the house just remembers. And maybe now it remembers me too. Back in high school, we were the kind of group that got bored easily. Friday nights meant someone's basement, cheap snacks, and doing whatever dumb thing we could think of that didn't get us caught by our parents. That night, it was Brandon's turn to host. His house was out near the edge of town, out past where the sidewalks ended, on a piece of land that had been part of a farm his family had owned for generations. The barn was still standing out back, and the fields behind the tree line looked like they went on forever. There were 7 of us total. Me, Brandon, our friends Jake and Trevor, 2 girls we were kind of seeing, Emily and Cassie's cousin Lauren, who had just moved into town. Lauren didn't know us that well, and I think she was just trying to get along, fit in. She was quiet, polite, one of those people who listens more than they talk. We had tried the Ouija board a few times before. Brandon had found it in his attic. It was one of those old, wooden ones, not the flimsy cardboard type you buy from a toy store. The letters were carved in, not printed, and the planchette had tiny felt feet that made it glide across the surface like it was floating. The first time we used it, nothing happened. Same the second time. It became more of a joke than anything. Something to mess with during sleepovers, something to use to creep out our girlfriends or tell fake stories around. So, when someone pulled it out again that night, no one really expected much. It was almost midnight. We were in Brandon's den, which had been converted from an old mudroom. It still smelled faintly of hay and dirt in the corners no matter how often it got cleaned. The lights were low, just a single lamp in the corner, and outside the windows the yard light buzzed against the dark. We were all sitting cross-legged on the floor around the board, and Lauren was the only one who hadn't tried it before. When we asked who wanted to go first, she kind of shrugged and said she'd try. Everyone laughed a little and acted spooky on purpose. Jake made some dumb joke about conjuring Satan, and someone else dimmed the lamp even more. But there was still that low yellow glow, and we could see each other clearly. We all put our fingers on the planchette, just lightly, like we always did. Someone asked the usual question, "Is anyone there?" No answer. Then someone else asked again, louder. Still nothing. Then slowly, the planchette moved to yes. We all looked at each other. That wasn't totally out of the ordinary. It had happened once or twice before, usually when one of us was trying to freak out the others. Still, the way it moved was odd. It wasn't jerky or rushed. It slid smooth and deliberate, like it knew where it was going. The next question was the typical one. "Who are you?" It spelled out a name, but not one any of us recognized. A boy's name, short, old-fashioned. I can't even remember the exact spelling because it wasn't one we'd heard before, but it sounded like something from a century ago. Then it started spelling other things. Details. It said it was 10 years old. It said it had lived here. Not just the town, this property. It said it had died on the land and was buried there. The spelling was strange. It misspelled some words the same way every time. Buried became buried. Farm was spelled farm. We were all quiet for a long time just watching the planchette move. Brandon kind of smiled and said it was probably one of us messing with everyone else. But we all kind of knew each other's tells. If someone had been guiding the planchette, they would have slipped, laughed, smirked. No one did. Then it got weirder. It started answering questions about the town. Historical things. Someone asked what year it was born, and it said 1839. Then someone else asked what the town was called back then, and it gave a name that none of us had heard before. Something long and old-fashioned. When Brandon looked it up later in a book his dad had about the town's founding, that exact name was listed as the original settlement name before it was changed in the 1870s. At that point, most of the jokes had stopped. No one was laughing anymore. Still, we weren't sure. Someone could have memorized that stuff. Maybe even Brandon, since it was his house, his board. We were still trying to play it cool, keep it light. We kept asking questions. Then, Brandon asked something that changed everything. He asked if the spirit could do something to prove it was really there. The planchette moved to yes. Then it slowly spelled out, Knock. We all looked around. The room was silent except for our breathing and the faint hum of the outside lamp through the glass. Then the planchette stopped moving, just sat still in the middle of the board. We waited. There was maybe 5 seconds of nothing. Then we heard it. 3 clear knocks on the window behind Brandon's head. Rap, rap, rap. Every single person in that room jumped. Brandon whipped around, and we all scrambled to our feet, knocking the board sideways. The planchette slid off and landed on the floor with a dull thud. The window had a clear view of the side yard. The light from the tall lamp was directly above it, casting a wide cone of brightness over the grass and driveway. There was no one there. Not a shadow, not a figure ducking away, nothing. Just the quiet hum of the bulb and the empty yard stretching into the dark. I remember feeling something cold in the pit of my stomach, a kind of hollow dread that didn't really make sense. I kept staring out that window waiting for someone, anyone, to pop up. Maybe Jake had gone out the back and come around to scare us. Maybe Trevor was in on it. But they were both standing right beside me. All 7 of us were there in the room. Lauren had her hand over her mouth. I don't think she said a word the rest of the night. We turned on every light in the house, walked through every room, checked the yard. Nothing. No footprints. No car pulling away. No one on the road. The knocks hadn't come from inside the wall. We all heard it, right on the glass. Crisp, loud, deliberate. We sat in the living room after that with the TV on, not really talking. Brandon took the board and put it back in the attic where he found it. We didn't touch it again. We didn't joke about it. Even now, all these years later, I still remember the exact sound of those knocks. What got me wasn't that the board moved. Not even that it gave strange answers. It was that none of us were alone, and we all had our eyes on each other. None of us left the room. None of us made that sound. And still, it happened. The next day, we went online and looked into the history of the property. Most of the records were vague, census logs, old maps. But there were some mentions of a family that had lived there in the 1850s. One of the sons had died young. No grave was listed. Brandon asked his dad, who laughed and said it was probably just a rumor, but when he showed us the corner of the yard where the foundation of a small building used to be, something that predated the current house, we realized it lined up with where the knocks had come from, right outside that wall. We never used the board again. Brandon threw it out eventually, maybe a year later when they moved to a new place. I don't know what happened to it, and I honestly don't care. I've heard all the theories. Subconscious muscle movements. Coincidence. Someone playing a trick. And most of the time, I believe those explanations. I want to believe them. But every now and then, when the house is quiet and I hear some random creak or tap in the night, I think about that night. About how confident we were. About how sure we were that it was all just pretend. Until it wasn't. And I still don't have a good answer for what really happened. All I know is it felt real. The kind of real that gets into your bones and never fully leaves. The kind that makes you think twice before laughing at things you don't understand. About 5 years and 2 boyfriends ago, I moved into an old farmhouse in the middle of nowhere with a man I was dating at the time. We had only been together for a few months, but things had gotten intense quickly. I was in a bad place emotionally, and he seemed like someone stable, someone who had his own place, his own routines, and who could maybe ground me. But the moment I saw the inside of that house, I should have turned around. He was a hoarder, the kind that couldn't walk through the living room without stepping over knee-high piles of garbage, junk mail, clothes, broken electronics, dishes, boxes. It smelled like a mix of mold and old grease and despair. I stood in the doorway the first time I visited, barely able to breathe, but he was embarrassed and apologetic, and I told myself I could fix it. Clean it. Make it livable. He didn't sleep inside the house. He slept in an RV parked just outside in the gravel driveway, hooked up to power. He said it was because the house was too messy and his snoring kept him awake. I later realized he hadn't slept inside the house in years. Not once. That should have told me something. But I was stubborn. I told myself I could make it better. So I got to work. I started with the living room. I'd come home from work and clean for hours, pulling out stained clothes and torn up furniture, scraping up old linoleum tiles that had peeled and warped, finding bags of garbage behind dressers and under couches. There were cobwebs in every corner, the wood paneling yellowed with age and nicotine. I Murphy's oiled every surface until it shined. I filled up the back of his truck with trash and hauled it to the dump over and over again. At least 10 loads, maybe more. The first night I spent there, the only cleared space was a small section of the living room where I'd set up a couch and some floor space to walk. He slept out in the RV. I stayed inside. I couldn't sleep next to that awful snoring, and honestly, I just wanted some space. It was around 4 in the morning, and I was lying on the couch, wide awake. I'd just gotten off the phone with my mom. We'd had one of our usual fights, stupid, dramatic, the kind that never go anywhere. And I was still angry, still stewing in it, staring at the wooden ceiling above me, trying to calm down. That's when I heard him come in through the back door. The door creaked a little, then closed again with a soft click. I could hear him muttering to himself, just like he always did when he was looking for something. Drawers opened and closed in the kitchen. A cupboard slammed shut. He seemed frustrated, maybe looking for a flashlight or a tool. I waited for a bit, listening. After a few minutes, I figured I'd get up and help him find whatever it was. I was already awake, and he was making enough noise to keep me that way. The kitchen was just 5 feet away from the couch. I stood up, walked in, and nothing. The room was empty. I looked around the corner, checked the mudroom, peeked down the hallway. There was no one there. I called out softly. Nothing. Now, I'm not someone who gets scared easily. I don't jump at shadows or assume the worst. I just figured maybe he'd gone back out to the RV real quick, so I stepped outside and headed toward the camper. Before I even got to the door, I could hear him snoring. That deep, rolling sound I knew all too well. I opened the door, peeked in. He was curled up on the bed, dead asleep, didn't even stir when I whispered his name. I asked him the next morning what he had needed from the house. He looked confused and told me he hadn't left the camper all night. I thought maybe he was sleepwalking or something, until I noticed the light dusting of snow that had fallen in the night. There were only my tracks in the snow, going from the house to the RV. None going the other way. I brushed it off, told myself I was tired, that I had imagined the noise. A few days later, I moved my cats in. 2 of them, normally calm, affectionate animals. But they were on edge the moment they entered the house. They growled at nothing, bolted out of rooms for no reason, hissed at walls. They especially avoided the bedroom, which I had finally cleared out and made habitable. I figured they were just stressed from the move. It was a new environment, full of unfamiliar smells and sounds. But even after a week, they wouldn't go near the bedroom, not even when I left treats inside. The first night I slept in the bedroom was the worst. I had set the bed up so it was against the wall beneath a large window that looked out over the cornfield. My boyfriend insisted on sleeping on the side of the bed closest to the room, which meant I was up against the window. I had this feeling, this overwhelming gut-level dread, that something was standing just outside that window. Something tall, watching. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. It made me curl up tight against the mattress, trembling, tears running down my face, even though I didn't understand why. He told me I was overreacting, dramatic, that it was just the wind. But I'm not like that. I've never had panic attacks, never had night terrors. That night was different. I left the bedroom and slept on the couch again. The next morning, I was walking back through the bedroom and noticed something on the window. A handprint. I had cleaned that window the day before. It had been spotless. But now there was a large, elongated smear, like a hand had pressed against the glass and dragged down slowly. I held my hand up to it. It was enormous, 3 times the size of mine, easily. And here's the thing, the window was over 9 feet off the ground. There was nothing underneath it except the open coal cellar, an old drop-down hatch in the ground, still partially exposed. I showed him. He just shrugged and said maybe it had been there before. Maybe I missed it. He always had some explanation, some way of brushing it off. That's when he told me that his ex-wife had once told him the house was weird too. That she'd been making dinner one night when she heard him come home from work. She'd heard the front door open, heard his boots on the floor, heard him talking as he walked in. They had a short conversation while she stirred the pot on the stove. Then she looked out the kitchen window and saw him pulling up in his truck. She'd been talking to no one. He laughed it off when he told me the story, said she was probably just hearing things. But the way he looked at me when he told it, there was something guarded in his eyes, like he wasn't saying everything. Still, I went on with things. I told myself it was in my head. Then one morning in the early spring, everything changed. It was 4:46 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I'd woken up needing to pee and checked my phone on the way to the bathroom. The bedroom was bright with early sunlight filtering in. The birds hadn't even started singing yet. I got up quietly, didn't wake him. Used the bathroom, washed my hands, came back to bed. Because I hated the idea of bugs near me while I slept, I had pushed the bed about 5 inches out from the wall. Just enough space that nothing could sneak up behind my head, but also not enough space to notice unless you were looking for it. I climbed back into bed and tucked my arm under the pillow, with my hand dangling slightly over the edge between the bed and the wall. The second I closed my eyes, something grabbed my wrist. An ice-cold hand wrapped around it and yanked, hard downward. I screamed and shot upright, heart in my throat. I pulled my hand back, and whatever had grabbed me didn't let go easily. I had to fight to free myself. I shook him awake, terrified, asking if he had touched me. He was confused, half asleep, annoyed. But I knew it wasn't him. It came from between the bed and the wall. That was the last straw for me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I called my best friend, someone who had known me for years and knew I didn't make stuff up. The first thing she said was, "You know there's a cemetery in view of your bedroom, right?" I had forgotten. It sat about half a mile away, just beyond the cornfield, mostly hidden by trees. One of those old pioneer cemeteries with headstones dating back to the 1800s. I'd seen it once and never thought about it again. She brought over a sage bundle. We laughed at ourselves as we walked through the house, waving it into corners and saying little half-serious chants. But from that day forward, nothing strange happened again. Well, almost nothing. A month or so later, I stepped on a soft patch of floor in the hallway and fell straight through it. My leg went through rotted wood and into what I later learned was an old coal chute. My shin was scraped up and bruised. I was lucky I didn't break it. We blamed it on the house being old and poorly maintained. The relationship didn't last much longer. The stress, the distance, all of it added up. I eventually moved out, took the cats, packed my stuff. We're still on friendly terms. Every now and then we catch up, and I always ask if anything weird has happened in the house since I left. He always says no. Nothing strange at all. But I still think about that cold hand, and I still wonder who or what used to live in that house. I was 17 the summer this happened, just on the edge of finishing school and trying to figure out what came next. My parents were always pushing for me to do something useful with my time, so visiting my great-grand felt like a good middle ground between doing nothing and actually working. Her name is Constance, and she turned 100 earlier that year. She's been bedridden for as long as I can remember, completely dependent on others, blind in both eyes except for a little foggy patch in one of them, and hasn't walked in decades. Despite all that, she's sharp. Her memory sort of comes and goes, but when it hits, it's vivid and rich with detail. Her voice is old and slow, but sometimes when she tells stories, especially about her early years in that house, it picks up. It's almost like it transports her back. She lives in this old schoolhouse on the edge of town, the kind of place with slate tiles and stone walls that stay cold even on the warmest days. It's tucked near the top of a small ridge that looks down over a river. From her bedroom window, the view is unreal. You see the whole valley open up with the water cutting through like a silver ribbon. But she doesn't see any of it. She spends her days lying on a single bed beside that window, a fan running in the corner, with old blankets covering her legs, even in the heat. Most of the time, she's just listening to the radio or lying in silence. I'd visit her maybe twice a week, more when school wasn't in session. That morning, I got there around 9. The front gate always squeaked, and her house had that smell that old places have, like dust, dry wood, and something else. Something I never could place. I checked in with her, made her a cup of tea, and asked if there was anything that needed doing around the place. She mentioned the garden, said it had become overgrown, especially the part near the side porch. That porch is where everyone goes in. The front door technically works, but it hasn't been opened in decades. Just beside that porch is a narrow walkway. It's like a gap between the house and the embankment. If you stand just right and look down it, you see it veers slightly. I'd seen it before, but never thought much of it. That morning, I actually looked properly. The path, maybe 10 meters long, led around the back of the house and curved out of sight. From the porch, it just looked like dead leaves and weeds. But now that I was inspecting it, I noticed the path didn't just stop. It turned behind the house. I figured I'd clear it up a bit and see what was down there. I went back inside, grabbed gloves, a rake, and got to work. As I started moving along the path, it became obvious no one had been down it in years. Branches hung down from above, leaves were thick underfoot, and little patches of moss clung to the edges of the wall. The path eventually opened into this strange little space, maybe 5 feet by 5 feet. It was boxed in on 3 sides. One side was the wall of the house, the other 2 were just part of the embankment. There were no other visible ways to get there. It wasn't visible from the road, the garden, or even any of the windows I could think of. Just this tiny enclosed patio-like spot. And on the far side, where the embankment curved into a wall, there was a door. It wasn't part of the house itself. It was set into the earth wall, surrounded by old bricks that had been placed ages ago. Ferns covered most of it, thick bracken twisted up around the edges, and the door itself looked like it hadn't been touched in a long, long time. The handle was rusted, and above it was a solid-looking padlock. Not new, but not destroyed by time either. Sturdy, clean, and locked tight. I pulled away the ferns around the center of the door and saw faint lettering carved or stamped into the wood. Games room. That's what it said. The letters were faded but clear. My first thought was that it made sense. The place was a school once, decades ago before my great-grand bought it. Maybe it was where kids came to play in the rain. But it seemed odd, being so far out the back like that. I tried the padlock just in case, but it wouldn't move. As I looked closer, I noticed a small circular hole just beneath the handle. I pulled out my phone, switched on the torch, and tried to peer inside. But there was something behind it, wood again, just a few inches in, as though someone had sealed it from the inside or doubled up the material. I couldn't see much beyond that. No light leaked through, just darkness. I stepped back and took a few photos, figuring I'd show them to my gran and maybe get a story out of her. I didn't expect much. Her vision's practically gone and she rarely goes outside now, but I thought it might jog something in her memory. Back upstairs, I showed her the pictures and explained what I found. She leaned in close, but couldn't make much of the image. When I mentioned the games room, she got a little confused. Said the games room she remembered was down under the stairs near the front. Said there were 2 rooms out back that were just storage. She didn't remember a games room where I found it. I asked her where the storage rooms were. She pointed roughly upward, toward the embankment behind the house. I remembered seeing some old wooden structures up there, half hidden by weeds and small trees. I decided to check them out. Climbing up that embankment wasn't easy. I used the side of the house and jammed my foot into gaps in the stone to pull myself up. Eventually, I reached a flat spot where 2 old wooden cellar doors sat side by side, blending into the earth. They looked more like oversized boxes with sloped tops. The hinges were covered in rust, and the handles had old locks on them that barely held together. I pulled one loose and pried the door open. Inside was exactly what she said, storage. A low room filled with nothing. The ground was dry dirt with bits of fabric or tarp strewn about. I looked around with my torch, brushing aside cobwebs, and found nothing. No hidden doors, no signs of anyone using it. Just a dead space. I checked the other door and found much the same. Later that day, I asked my grandparents, Constance's daughter and son-in-law, if they remembered anything about the games room or the back patio space. They seemed surprised I'd even found that part of the property. My gran didn't remember anything like a games room out there, but when I insisted, she agreed to come up and take a look. It took her longer to climb up, and she needed help most of the way. We made our way through the garden, past the side path, into the 5-foot space with the door. When she saw it, she looked puzzled. Not scared, just confused. She didn't touch the lock, didn't lean close to look. She just stood there for a moment before saying we should head inside because it'd be time to bring me home soon. That was it. That should have been the end of it. But something about it kept gnawing at me. Over the next few weeks, I found myself going back, always trying to make sense of that door. It wasn't just that it was hidden or forgotten. It felt sealed off. The padlock was the only thing that looked new. Everything else had aged, cracked, rotted, but not that lock. That meant someone put it there after everything else had been abandoned. I tried to forget about it, but I couldn't. One weekend, I brought a friend over. He's a bit more bold than me, not one to overthink things. I showed him the door and the lock. He tried picking it with some old tools we found in the shed. No luck. We debated cutting it, but I knew if we damaged anything and my parents or grandparents found out, they'd kill me. Instead, we explored around the back of the embankment. Nothing but trees and thick undergrowth. But from up there, we saw how isolated the space really was. You couldn't see it from any angle unless you stood directly in it. No windows faced that direction. No one walking along the main path would see it. If someone had gone in there, they could disappear and no one would know. A few days later, I searched for building plans. Nothing digital existed, but I asked around and eventually found some old documents from the town archive. The original layout from when the school was still functioning showed 2 storage rooms in the embankment and a games room, exactly where my gran said it was under the stairs, but nothing in the spot I found. I brought this up again with Constance. She was in one of her clearer moods that day. When I mentioned the door again, she went quiet for a long time. Then she said something I didn't expect, something that stuck with me. She said sometimes people came to the house after dark, a long time ago. Men, she said. Not burglars, just men who knew the house well. said they knew ways in and out that no one else did. She told me this like she was reciting a grocery list, like it was just a fact. Then she lay back, closed her eyes, and didn't say another word. I never asked again. That door is still locked. I walk past it every time I go back, sometimes just to make sure it's still there. The padlock hasn't rusted. The wood hasn't warped. The bracken always grows back around it, but I know it's there. It spooks me, not because of ghosts or anything like that, but because it's real. Because my family, who have lived in that house for decades, don't remember it. Because it wasn't on any records. Because it's hidden in plain sight. Because someone went to a lot of effort to seal it off, and no one seems to care why. And because deep down, I know that someone, at some point in time, used that room. Not for games. I don't need to open it to know that. My high school had this history that never sat right with me. It used to be a mansion before it was turned into an orphanage sometime in the early 1900s, and then eventually it became the high school I attended. The building always felt older than the rest of town, like it had been there before the neighborhood grew up around it. It had thick stone walls, iron window frames, and wide staircases that creaked and echoed when you walked on them. Even with all the modern updates, you couldn't scrub out the age of that place. The hallways smelled like old wood and cleaning fluid, and there were places where the floor dipped or groaned underfoot no matter how many times they renovated. One part of the school, though, was totally off limits, the third floor. The stairwell leading up to it was inside the chorus room, tucked behind the risers and the old instrument storage closets. You could barely notice it unless someone pointed it out. It was blocked off, sealed, really. Thick wooden boards had been nailed over the entrance and painted black to match the chorus room walls. They even hung some posters over it so it blended in, but you knew it was there once you were told about it. That staircase was like a locked attic door in an old house. Just the fact that you weren't allowed up there made you want to know what was at the top. The rumors? They were endless. Everyone had heard that part of the building still looked like it did when it was an orphanage. Some kids swore the place was haunted, that the third floor was never fully remodeled when it became a school, that doors would slam up there when nobody was around. Others claimed they'd seen shadows moving through the windows from the parking lot, even though the place had been sealed off for decades. Of course, most of that was just bored kids telling stories. But then in the fall of 2003, things shifted. That year, the school put on Les Miserables. I was in the theater group, along with my friends Ryan, Mike, and Michelle. Because the school served a wide area, some of us lived far from campus. So if you had rehearsal in the evening, you'd just stay after school rather than go home and come back. We'd hang out in empty classrooms, play card games, explore the building a bit. It was harmless, just a way to kill time. Well, for the show, they decided they needed to replace some of the old windows. A few of them were on the third floor. So, for the first time in years, the wood covering the stairwell was removed. The staircase itself had been sitting untouched for who knows how long, and it looked like it. The steps were rotted, some warped and splintered, others with actual chunks missing from the edges. It wasn't safe, but that didn't stop anyone. They also let us use some of the windows they took out as set pieces for the barricade. It was kind of cool, honestly. Holding this ancient, heavy pane of glass with chipped white paint and rusted hinges. You could feel the weight of history in those windows. Real parts of the building's past, now being turned into props for our high school musical. A few days after the boards came down, we were sitting around waiting for practice to start. Ryan and I had found an empty vending machine box and were trying to fit Mike inside it. Michelle was sitting on the floor by the lockers reading something for class. We were restless, like always. That's when Ryan brought up the stairs. They didn't put the boards back yet, he said, like it was nothing. We could just go see it. Right now. I didn't even need convincing. I'd been curious about that stairwell since my first week as a freshman. So we grabbed our bags and slipped into the chorus room. The lights were off, and the windows didn't let in much light through the thick curtains, but you could still see the outline of the stairwell now that it was exposed again. It looked wrong. The steps disappeared upward into shadow. There was a layer of dust on the railing, so thick you could write in it. It didn't look like part of the school. It looked like something from another building, another time. We went up one by one because the wood creaked and sagged under our feet. You could feel it move slightly with every step, like the staircase wasn't fully attached anymore. I remember how I paused on one step when it gave out a loud crack, heart hammering. thinking it might collapse under me. But it didn't. Eventually, we all made it to the top. The hallway was disappointing. Plain white walls, some water damage, light fixtures without bulbs, old tiles that had cracked and peeled. Doors lined the sides, most of them open. It smelled like mold and dry paper. One room had metal bed frames stacked against the wall. Another had filing cabinets tipped over, drawers pulled out, paper everywhere. We made our way into a large open space at the far end. It looked like it might have once been a classroom, or maybe a dormitory. There were broken desks, chairs, boxes filled with old tests and worksheets, stuff from the 80s or earlier. Faded ink, yellowed paper. Michelle started going through the papers like an archaeologist, laughing at the old names and terrible grades. We were just hanging out, not feeling scared. The place didn't feel haunted. It just felt forgotten. That's when Ryan got the idea to mess with her. While Michelle was in one of the side rooms with her back turned, digging through a crate, Ryan motioned for Mike and me to follow him. We crept out quietly and ducked into the next room over. It was small, barely the size of a bathroom. Probably was one once. Just bare tile and an old sink without a mirror. We hid behind the open door, waiting for her to freak out. And she did. Michelle came out a moment later yelling, panicked. "Guys, hello. Where the hell did you go?" We stifled our laughter, trying to hold back the noise as she stormed past. But then something happened. A sound, soft and sudden, like a little girl giggling, came from right behind us. I froze. I turned to Ryan, thinking maybe it was him. But his hand was over his mouth, eyes wide. Mike, too. He looked like he'd just swallowed something wrong. There was no room for a fourth person in there. It was tiny, empty, no closets, no places to hide. And none of us had made that sound. I couldn't make sense of it. My brain tried to explain it away. Maybe it echoed from the hallway. Maybe someone had followed us up. But that didn't track. We hadn't seen anyone. We would have heard them coming up those stairs. Then we heard it again. More giggling. But not just one voice this time. It sounded like 2 or 3, maybe more. High-pitched, quick, overlapping. Like kids trying not to get caught. That's when Ryan lost it. He shoved the door open so hard it hit the wall and bolted down the hallway, screaming. Full panic. It startled Michelle so badly she screamed too and ran after him. We followed, sprinting through the hallway, past the paper stacks and broken desks. The stairs felt like they were collapsing beneath us as we flew down them all at once. No more taking turns. I tripped halfway down and scraped my hand on the railing, but I didn't stop. None of us did. We didn't say much after that. We just sat in the commons area for a while, not looking at each other. When practice started, we didn't mention it. Not even to the others in theater. But someone must have told. The next day, we were called aside by a janitor, old guy with gray hair and sunspots on his face. He didn't yell. Just told us the stairs were unstable, not to go up again, and that the area was going to be sealed off soon. Said we were lucky we didn't fall through the floor. After that, it was like a switch got flipped. People started going up there more. Not just us, other kids. Word got out. They wanted to hear the giggles. Some came back saying they did. Others said nothing happened. One kid swore he saw a shadow standing at the end of the hall. Another said the floor moved under him, like it was breathing. But it all stopped after the windows were replaced, and the stairwell was boarded up again. This time with heavier wood, painted sealed tight. The school administration didn't talk about it. Just acted like the third floor never existed. The chorus teacher even rearranged the risers to block the wall entirely. A year later, the school closed. Low funding, enrollment drop. Whatever the reason, the building was left empty. Now it just sits there, slowly rotting from the inside out. I've driven past it since, seen it through my windshield. The third floor windows still catch the light sometimes. And I think about that room, the one barely big enough for 3 people, and that giggle. Maybe someone had been living up there. A squatter. A runaway. Maybe we spooked a kid hiding from something worse. Or maybe our minds just made something up in the dark, something our brains couldn't explain. I don't know. But I do know this. Whatever it was, it didn't want to hurt us. It wanted to laugh. And that's what still messes with me the most. I was in my early 30s when I decided to take a few days off from everything and just drive. No real plan. I'd been working nonstop, buried in routines, deadlines, emails, noise. I needed to feel quiet again. Not the kind of quiet you get from noise-canceling headphones or sleeping late on a Sunday morning, but the kind that presses in on all sides. The kind that makes you notice your heartbeat and the sound of your own breathing. I packed light. A backpack with clothes for 3 days, some granola bars, my water bottle, my tent, a sleeping bag, flashlight, knife, power bank, and my old Nikon camera. I left my apartment early one morning, before the sun came up. I just drove north, following the old state highway past farmland and small towns, past strip malls, and then nothing but fields and woods. I didn't even check Google Maps much, just followed the roads that felt right. By late afternoon, I found myself somewhere in the northern edge of the state, deep in logging country. No cell service, and the paved road had turned into gravel some miles back. I passed a rusted-out sign that said Shale Ridge State Land, tilted and nearly hidden behind overgrowth. It wasn't even marked on my GPS. The road kept going, winding through thick trees, and eventually opened up into a small clearing with just enough space to park a car and turn around. I stopped there, killed the engine, got out. There wasn't a sound. Not a bird, not a breeze. The air smelled like pine needles and dirt. The trees stood tall and close together. No one else around. I was so far out there, I felt like I'd stepped out of the world. It was exactly what I wanted. I locked the car, grabbed my gear, and walked into the woods. There was no official trail, but the terrain wasn't too rough. I followed a deer path for a while, ducking under branches and stepping over fallen logs. I wasn't worried about getting lost. I marked trees with a small strip of orange tape every few hundred feet. Old habit from when I used to hike more. After maybe a mile or so, I found a decent spot to set up camp. Small clearing, mostly flat, surrounded by thick trees. I set up my tent, unrolled the sleeping bag, and gathered some firewood. No need for a fire right away, but it was easier to do while I had daylight. I chewed on a granola bar, drank some water, and just sat there, letting the silence soak in. The first night was calm. A little cold, but not bad. I stayed up late, taking photos of the trees and sky. The stars were insane that far from town. Millions of them, brighter than I'd seen in years. I heard some rustling in the underbrush a few times, probably raccoons or a deer. Nothing unusual. I fell asleep sometime after midnight. The second day, I hiked deeper into the forest. Left my tent and sleeping bag behind, just took my pack, knife, flashlight, water, and camera. The land sloped gently downward the farther I went, and the trees grew thicker, darker. After about an hour, I found what looked like an old fire road, overgrown but still clear enough to follow. I walked it for a while, curious where it led. Eventually, the path opened into another clearing, larger than the one I'd camped in. At the far end stood what remained of a cabin. The roof had collapsed inward, and one wall was entirely gone. Moss covered what little structure was left. I could tell it had been abandoned for a long time. There was something strange about it, though. Despite how far gone the cabin looked, the ground around it was oddly clear. No weeds, no underbrush, just bare dirt. Like someone or something had been maintaining it. I stepped closer and noticed something even weirder. Fresh boot prints in the dirt. Not old, worn-down impressions, but sharp-edged prints with deep treads. Recent. Probably no more than a day, or too old. That stopped me cold. Who the hell else would be way out here? There weren't any marked trails, no sign of campers, no tire tracks on the road where I parked. I felt my pulse pick up. I looked around, but didn't see anyone. No tents, no packs, no movement. Just that ruined cabin and those boot prints. I didn't want to stick around. I turned back the way I came, moving quicker than before, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. I didn't run, but I walked fast, heart thudding. It wasn't like I was afraid of being attacked. It was more the feeling that I'd walked into someone else's space, somewhere I shouldn't have been. When I got back to my tent, everything was exactly how I left it. I made a fire before the sun went down and kept it going into the night. I didn't want to be in the dark. I barely slept. I kept listening for footsteps or twigs snapping. I kept my knife next to me in the sleeping bag. The next morning, I decided I'd had enough. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy, watchful. I packed up everything and started heading back to my car, following the orange tape markers I'd left on the trees. About halfway back, I stopped dead in my tracks. One of the tape strips was gone. Not fallen off, not lying on the ground. Just gone. The branch it had been tied to was bare. I checked the next few trees. Another one missing. Then another. My trail had been messed with. Someone had been following me. My mouth went dry. I turned slowly, scanning the trees, but saw nothing. Just woods thick and still. I knew the general direction back to my car, but without the tape, I'd have to guess my way. I kept moving, this time more carefully, watching for landmarks I remembered. Eventually, after nearly 2 tense hours of guessing and backtracking, I saw the glint of my car through the trees. Relief hit me hard, and I practically jogged the rest of the way. When I reached the car, I stopped again. The driver's side door was open. I know for a fact I locked it. I double-checked when I left. I never leave my car unlocked, especially not way out in the woods. But now, the door was open, and inside, everything had been rummaged through. Glove box emptied. Map pulled out. My phone, which I'd left plugged into the car charger, was gone. There were muddy boot prints on the floor mat. I didn't wait to investigate further. I tossed my pack in the back, slammed the door shut, and jumped into the driver's seat. I started the engine and backed out fast, gravel crunching under the tires. I didn't calm down until I hit pavement again. I drove straight back home. Didn't stop for gas, food, nothing. When I got back to my apartment, I took the knife out of my pack and put it on the nightstand. I didn't sleep much that night either. Over the next few days, I kept thinking about what happened. I replaced my phone, changed my email passwords, checked my bank accounts. Nothing seemed out of place. Then a week later, I found something in my mailbox. No return address. Just a plain envelope with my name written in blocky handwriting. Inside was a photo. It was me, asleep in my tent, taken from just outside the mesh window, close enough that my face filled the frame. I moved apartments the next month, broke my lease, paid the penalty, packed everything I had and left. I don't go camping anymore. I don't drive without checking the back seat first. I stopped taking random roads. I still have the photo. I keep it in a locked box at the back of my closet, just in case I ever forget how quickly the world can turn on you when you think you're alone. I never used to think much about early mornings. I'd wake up, shower, eat something quick, and head out for my shift like most people. I worked as a part-time maintenance guy at this regional warehouse on the edge of town, mostly fixing busted lights, checking water pressure, doing a bit of inventory stacking when needed. Nothing glamorous. The kind of job that gives you just enough to survive, but not enough to feel secure. What made it better was that it was close to home, and I didn't have to deal with too many people. It was late October, and the air had started to shift. You know that early morning kind of cold, where it hasn't snowed yet, but the wind feels sharp, and the fog clings low to the ground like it's too heavy to lift? That was the kind of morning it was. I'd picked up an early shift because one of the water heaters in the warehouse basement had started acting up the night before. Management wanted someone to check it before the trucks started loading up for the day. They didn't like the idea of their drivers taking breaks in freezing rooms. I got to the warehouse at around 4:45 a.m. The sky was still dark, and the parking lot lights gave everything a kind of dull orange hue. My breath came out in clouds as I stepped out of my car. There weren't many other vehicles there yet, just the usual security guy's car and the shift supervisor's little white hatchback. The main entrance was already unlocked for me. Inside it was quiet, a kind of hum from the ceiling lights and the occasional creak from the ductwork above. The warehouse was a massive place, rows upon rows of tall metal racks stacked with boxes, tools, shipping crates. The office area was on the second level, a little glassed-in hallway that overlooked the floor. But the water heater was in the basement, and that's where I headed. The stairs down were at the far back, past the last set of shelves. I had to walk nearly the full length of the warehouse. My boots echoed on the concrete floor with every step. The place always felt strange when it was empty, like it wasn't meant to be still. The shelves cast long, strange shadows under the fluorescent lights, and every so often, I'd hear something shift far down a row. Probably something settling, maybe a rat or two, but it always made me glance back. The basement door was a heavy metal thing. No windows, just a keypad to the side and a red exit sign above. I punched in the code, and it clicked open with a heavy clunk. The lights in the stairwell were motion activated and flickered to life as I stepped down. The air immediately felt colder, more damp, the kind of place that hadn't been properly cleaned in years. You could smell the mix of mildew, rust, and dust as you got lower. The basement wasn't big. One hallway, maybe 3 doors. The water heater was behind the third. I'd been down here before, but not often. The lights overhead were dim, and one of them near the end kept flickering. I got to the water heater door and pulled it open. The smell hit stronger here. Wet metal and something else. Like old meat, faint but there. I stepped inside, pulling the flashlight from my tool belt because the room's overhead bulb had been out for months and no one bothered fixing it. The heater stood against the wall, big and old, with a pipe that always rattled slightly when the pressure kicked in. I crouched down, opened the bottom panel, and started checking the pilot light. It was on. That wasn't the issue. The main line looked fine, too. I checked the pressure gauge. It was running a little high. Probably a valve issue. I stood back up and turned to grab my wrench when I heard a noise. It was faint, like something dragging across concrete. I paused, listening. It came again. A low scrape, then a quick thump. I turned off my flashlight and stood still. The light outside the door was still flickering, casting strange shadows down the hallway. I stepped toward the doorway and looked out. Nothing. Just the hallway. The other 2 doors were closed, same as always. The flickering light buzzed and cast light in uneven waves. I told myself it was probably the air vents. Maybe one of the pipes shaking loose. I'd seen that happen before. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. The air had that same kind of charge you feel right before a thunderstorm. Like everything was holding its breath. I went back inside, did a quick fix on the pressure valve, tightened it up, then rechecked everything. All good. Took about 15 minutes total. I packed up my tools and stepped back into the hallway. That's when I noticed something. The door to the first room, one that had been closed when I came down, was now open. Only slightly. Maybe a foot wide. Just enough to see darkness inside. I stopped and stared at it. I hadn't heard it open, and no one else should have been down here. We didn't store anything in that room anymore. Used to be for electrical panels, but all the systems had been moved upstairs over the past year. It was supposed to be locked. I never carried the key because there was no need to open it. I walked slowly toward it, my flashlight in hand, tools clanking softly on my belt. The hallway was quiet again, dead quiet. I stopped in front of the open door and shone the light inside. Empty, just a bare room. Concrete floor, stained in places, and a couple of broken shelves leaning against the wall. But there were footprints on the floor. Damp ones, bare feet, like someone had walked across wet ground and stepped inside. They were small, too small to be an adult man's. Maybe a kid's? I stood there for a second, trying to wrap my head around it. I even looked behind me, half expecting to see someone sneaking up or messing around. But there was no one. I backed away from the room slowly and shut the door. The latch clicked. Still no key in the lock. I don't even think it was possible to open from the outside without one. But I didn't want to think about that too much. Back up the stairs I went, faster than usual, hands tight on the railing. I locked the basement door behind me. Upstairs, the warehouse was starting to come alive. A couple of the forklift guys were clocking in. I tried to shake it off. Told myself maybe I was wrong about the door. Maybe someone had been down there and forgot to close it fully last time. Maybe the damp footprints were old, and I just hadn't noticed them before. Still, I kept thinking about that sound. That dragging scrape. The way the light flickered, as if it was trying to tell me something. That kind of stuff gets under your skin if you let it. But then it got worse. Over the next few weeks, little things kept happening. Only when I had early shifts. A toolbox that I'd closed the night before would be open the next morning. A ladder I'd leaned against the wall would be lying flat. Once, a roll of electrical tape somehow unraveled itself halfway across the floor. I told my supervisor. He laughed it off. Said maybe I was just tired, or that someone was messing with me. But I didn't tell him everything. Not about how I started hearing that dragging noise more often, or how, once, when I looked down the warehouse aisle, I thought I saw a shadow dart across just out of the light. Too fast to be anything real. Still, I showed up. I needed the job. One morning, I got there around the same time, 4:45 a.m. I parked, walked inside. But something was off from the moment I stepped through the door. The silence was wrong. Heavier. I couldn't hear the hum from the overhead lights. I looked up. The first 5 rows of lights were off. Not flickering. Not buzzing. Just off. I walked forward, shining my flashlight. My boots echoed even louder in the quiet. The shelves loomed over me in darkness. And there it was again. That dragging sound. Closer this time. I turned, light swinging wide. Nothing, but I felt it, like eyes on the back of my neck. That prickling, skin-tightening feeling you get when you know someone's there, but you can't prove it. I tried to ignore it. I had to fix a jammed loading dock sensor. Made my way to the back where the sensor panel was. I got on one knee and started removing the cover when I heard a breath. Not mine. Close. Right behind me. I turned so fast I nearly dropped the flashlight. Swung it up, heart slamming in my chest. No one, but the air around me was cold. Not just cold, freezing. I backed away slowly. Left the sensor panel open. Walked backward until I hit the far wall, light scanning every shadow. And that's when I saw it. Just at the edge of the fifth aisle. A shape, low to the ground, like someone crouching. Still, I froze. The beam of light caught something pale, skin. Then it moved, slid sideways behind the shelving without a sound. I ran, didn't stop to check the lights, didn't finish the repair. I ran straight to my car, got in, locked the doors, and sat there until the sky started to lighten. That was the last early shift I took. I told the manager I'd work days only. Said I was having trouble with the schedule. He didn't ask questions, but I still wonder. Because one day, a few weeks later, one of the forklift guys, Miguel, didn't show up for work. They said he quit, but he'd been there for years. Left all his stuff behind. Phone, jacket, even his boots. They said he left in the middle of the night. But I checked. He'd had the early shift. And I think I know where he went. But I'm not going down there to find out. I had just finished a freelance job that left me drained. It was one of those contracts where the client kept changing their mind, and I barely slept for a week. So when my cousin Jason called and told me he was going up to his cabin for the weekend and asked if I wanted to tag along, I didn't even hesitate. He said we wouldn't be doing anything crazy, just some hiking, maybe grilling at night, and drinking a few beers. I packed light, clothes, hiking boots, a flashlight, a book, some canned food just in case, and my old survival knife that had been sitting at the bottom of a drawer for years. The cabin was deep in the mountains, somewhere in Colorado. I had only been there once as a teenager with my uncle. I remembered it being peaceful, quiet, completely cut off from everything. No cell service, no neighbors. The kind of silence that's so heavy it makes your ears ring. Jason said he'd be up a day before me since I had to wrap up the job. I drove out Friday evening, the sun already starting to dip behind the trees. It was a long, winding road that turned into a gravel path the deeper I got. I had to drive real slow since potholes had started to open in the trail. There were no lights, no signs, just memory and instinct guiding me. My tires kicked up dust, and every now and then I'd have to stop to move a fallen branch or just make sure I hadn't veered off the path. Eventually, after what felt like an hour of crawling through the woods, I saw the familiar outline of the cabin come into view. It looked the same, maybe a little more worn down. Logs darkened by rain, a sagging porch, a rusted metal chair still sitting in the corner like it hadn't been touched in years. Jason's truck was nowhere to be seen. I parked beside the cabin and got out, expecting to hear him call out, maybe see smoke from the chimney if he had already gotten a fire going. But there was nothing. No sound except the breeze rustling through the trees and the occasional creak from the old wooden frame. I knocked on the door anyway, half laughing to myself. Then I let myself in. The cabin smelled like dry wood dust and something slightly musky. The living room was dim, even though it wasn't fully dark outside yet. No lights were on. I figured maybe Jason had gone for a walk or something. I unpacked, tossed my bag on the couch, and sat down. I should have been relaxed, but something was off. It took me a while to realize what it was. The place was too still. The air inside felt thick, untouched. I checked the fridge, empty. The sink was dry. No dirty dishes. The bed in the back room was made up, and there were no signs anyone had been there recently. I opened a few drawers. No clothes, no food, not even Jason's toothbrush or phone charger. I walked back outside and circled around the cabin, calling his name, feeling dumber each time. No response. I walked to the edge of the tree line behind the cabin and looked out. Nothing but dense forest, just as I remembered. I called him again, louder this time. Still nothing. I pulled out my phone, even though I knew there was no signal. 0 bars. No surprise. I figured maybe he got delayed or decided not to come. It was weird because he'd told me to meet him here, but maybe he'd changed plans and forgot to tell me. I wasn't worried yet, just confused. I made myself a quick meal from the cans I brought, opened a beer, and sat outside as the sky turned from orange to purple to black. The silence was suffocating. That night, I couldn't sleep. The cabin creaked constantly. Every shift in the wood sounded like a footstep. I kept thinking I heard something just outside, like a twig snapping or leaves rustling. But every time I shined my flashlight through the windows, I saw nothing. Around 3 a.m., I finally dozed off in a shallow, restless sleep. The next morning, I got up early and walked the nearby trail, thinking maybe Jason had shown up and parked somewhere else, or maybe he'd left a note or some sign that he'd been there. The trail wound uphill toward a small clearing with a fire pit where we used to camp as kids. I checked it, nothing. On the way back, I noticed something strange, a set of tire tracks veering off the main path. They looked fresh. I followed them maybe 50 feet before they disappeared into overgrowth, but there was no sign of a vehicle. It was as if someone had driven into the woods, and then nothing. I returned to the cabin, uneasy. I tried to distract myself by chopping wood, organizing things inside, but I kept checking the driveway every half hour. Still no truck. No Jason. I ate early that night and decided to call it. Maybe I'd pack up in the morning and drive back into town to call him. But then something happened. Just as I was brushing my teeth using bottled water, I heard a thud outside. Not an animal sound. A single, heavy, deliberate thud, like someone had dropped a heavy backpack on the porch. I froze. The toothbrush hung from my mouth, dripping. I turned off my flashlight and crouched down near the window. My heartbeat was pounding in my ears. I waited in silence for a minute. Then two. No movement. I finally stood, quietly stepped to the door, and peeked out through the side window. Nothing was there, but something had been. The dirt just beyond the wooden steps looked disturbed, like someone had dragged something through it. I opened the door slowly and stepped out, flashlight in hand. I scanned the porch. Still nothing. I followed the disturbed dirt trail with the beam. It curved around the side of the cabin and vanished near the tree line. Then I noticed something wedged between the boards of the porch rail. It was a piece of paper. Torn. Dirty. Damp. I pulled it free. There was no writing, just smudges. Grease or blood, I couldn't tell. My chest tightened. I looked around again. The darkness between the trees looked thicker now. I felt eyes on me, even though I couldn't see a thing. I went back inside, locked the door, and shoved a chair under the knob. I didn't sleep that night at all. Every hour, I thought I heard something move on the porch. At one point, I was sure I saw a shadow move across the front window, but when I snapped the flashlight on, it was gone. I sat with my back to the wall, knife in hand, until the sky began to lighten. At first light, I threw my stuff into my bag and got in the car. I didn't even eat. I was done. I just wanted to get out. But as I started the engine and turned to pull out, I saw it. Jason's truck. It was off the trail, hidden behind a thicket of trees just a little up the hill. I almost missed it. I jumped out of the car and climbed up to it. The truck was cold, covered in dust. No signs of forced entry, but the driver's door was unlocked. Inside, I found his jacket on the seat. A flashlight, some snacks, a half-full water bottle, but no phone, no wallet. The keys were still in the ignition, but the battery was dead. The worst part was the mud on the tires. Thick, dry mud. Jason had been here. I looked around the woods, heart racing, and yelled his name. My voice echoed, but nothing came back. I followed a faint trail leading away from the truck. It dipped into a shallow ravine, and then up the other side, weaving through the trees. I kept going, calling, scanning, until I spotted something bright against the green. A torn piece of orange cloth. I rushed over. It looked like it had been part of a windbreaker or hoodie. There was no blood, no obvious damage, but it was snagged on a branch. I pushed ahead, climbing over roots, slipping on damp leaves. The forest felt endless, like it was closing in. Then I smelled it. Something foul. Sharp. Rotting. I covered my mouth and pressed forward. That's when I saw the clearing. A small dip in the land, surrounded by tall pine trees. In the center, a mess of broken branches, scattered trash, a cooler, a torn sleeping bag. And just beyond that, a shallow pit. Dug by hand, maybe with a shovel. Not wide, but deep enough to hide something. I felt bile rise in my throat as I approached. I couldn't see into the hole from the angle I stood, and I couldn't make myself get closer. My legs locked up. Something was wrong, more than wrong. Something terrible had happened here. I turned and ran. I don't know how long or how far. I just ran, not following the trail, just moving toward where I thought the road was. I tripped, slammed my knee on a rock, tore my sleeve on a branch. I finally burst out onto the gravel path and limped back to the cabin. I grabbed my bag, tossed it in the car, and peeled out. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station with signal. I called the police. They searched the woods for 3 days. They found Jason's prints near the truck. They found the clearing. They found signs that someone had been camping there. But no body, no blood, no signs of a struggle. They didn't find him. What they did find, weeks later, was a small camera buried under some leaves near the pit. The SD card was damaged, but they recovered a few images. Most were black or blurry, but one stood out. It showed Jason sitting by a fire. He looked tired, maybe scared. Behind him, barely visible in the shadows, was the outline of another man. Tayir, wearing a hood, just standing there, watching. That's all we ever found. They never found Jason, and I never went back. Not to the cabin, not to the woods. Sometimes I still wake up at night, thinking I hear something on the porch. I tell myself it's nothing, just my mind, just a memory. But deep down, I know something was out there, and it wasn't alone. I remember when everything changed, how everyday life slid into quiet dread without warning. I was driving home one evening after work, stuck in traffic on a dim, winding road that cut through farmland outside the city. The air smelled like wet earth, and the sun was dipping fast. Soft gray clouds pulled up overhead, making the fields look dull and lifeless. I kept checking my rearview mirror for lights from cars behind, but the road was nearly empty, just me and the silence. The radio played low noise from a talk station, voices muted beneath static. I glanced out the window. The cornfields on either side swayed in the breeze, but the wind felt off, cold in the bones, though the temperature was warm just minutes ago in the sun. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. Something about that restless corn made me uneasy, like I was being watched. I shook it off and kept going. A mile up, the highway split. A sign pointed left toward a small town 20 minutes away. Straight kept going deeper into rural roads. I had some errands to run in town, so I turned left. Half a mile later the road narrowed, trees crowding in overhead like they wanted to block the sky. My headlights flicked on without me thinking, and the world shrunk to a cone of weak light ahead. I struggled to see past the immediate road, and my ears strained for sounds. The tires rattled over patches of gravel. I passed a broken-down pickup sitting at an angle on the shoulder, engine off, door slightly ajar. No hazard lights. I slowed, thinking someone might need help, but I passed too fast to clearly see inside. There was no one around, no sign of anyone. The air smelled faintly of gasoline, something spilled. I felt a quick jolt of warning, but felt foolish. Maybe a flat, maybe they walked to get help. I eased forward, my heart thumping. The road curved sharply ahead, and the finish line for this stretch was a derelict bridge crossing a narrow creek. The guardrails were rusted, paint broken. I drove over slowly. As I crossed, I glanced down through pools of shadow water and saw something odd. Footprints pressed into the mud under the bridge, fresh and crisp. Heavy boot prints, 2 lines on one side and 2 on the other. They led from one side of the creek to the other, then disappeared. No one standing there. No tracks beyond or before, just the muddy indentations and stillness around. A chill ran down my spine. I sped up once off the bridge, heart racing. The road straightened, fields opening up again. I tried to shake the feeling. There's no one here. Maybe a farmhand crossed the creek for work. I focused on the radio, tried to calm. I came to a stoplight as I approached the town boundary. A small cluster of lights and signs, then civilization. Inside town I ran errands. A quick grocery stop, fill gas, pick up something at the hardware store. As I finished, I looked at my phone. Almost dark outside now, nearing 8 p.m. Town lights glowed. Life felt normal. I felt safe. I left down the highway the same route in reverse. I passed the hardware store parking lot heading out, headlights bright. Past the bridge again. I slowed, then saw another car pulled over at the old pickup location, headlights off. I thought it must be someone else from town, maybe a farmer. As I approached, I noticed the person inside had their head down. I turned my head away, uncomfortable. I drove past quickly, uneasy, legs shaking a bit. I told myself it's late, maybe it's nothing. I checked the rear view. The car stayed exactly where I'd passed, no brake lights or movement. I was breathing fast. I pressed the accelerator and pushed past. Soon after, I saw something flash between trees, white in the shadows. It looked human-shaped. I thought maybe someone walking along the road, stranded. I slowed, ready to pull over. But I saw no one. Stillness. Then headlights flared behind me, bright, but nothing passed. No urgent flashing or siren. I pulled to the side at the next pull-off, heart pounding, parking completely. I sat, engine off. Darkness pressed around. I thought I should call someone. Instead, I just stared out at empty lanes and trees. I glanced at my phone again, almost dead. I considered walking back toward where I saw the car or the pickup, but reasoning. No one in town would need help out here at night. I cursed myself for being paranoid. 10 minutes later, I turned the engine back on, headlights slashing into dark road ahead, and eased back onto the pavement. I told myself to drive straight home, no stops. As I drove, I replayed the pickup, the footprints under the bridge, the car that remained where I passed it. All coincidences maybe, but my throat felt tight. I came to the town exit, turn off for highway back toward the city. I turned. Soon I passed the bridge again. This time I slowed even more. My headlights skimmed the muddy banks. I saw the same footprints. But now I noticed something else. On one footprint, a piece of cloth was caught, ragged and fluttering faintly even in the still air. It looked fresh. I swallowed and turned forward fast. I didn't stop. I watched in the mirror. Headlights glanced off something white near the creek banks, maybe the same rag of cloth. As I pulled farther, it vanished. I didn't look back again. I didn't call anyone. Phone died. I watched the odometer tick until I reached a lit intersection, the main road back toward the city. Relief washed into me. After that, for days I tried to rationalize. Maybe a lost hiker crossing creek. Someone walking from car to creek, dropped cloth. But deep down I felt chains of dread whenever I thought about that drive. I couldn't sleep well. Every creak of wind. I kept dreaming of headlights in the dark and footsteps under the bridge. One night I found myself driving the same road again, though I hadn't planned it. I stopped my car at dusk, just before the bridge, turned the engine off. The air hung golden, peaceful. I exhaled. I walked back to the bridge on foot. Large mistake maybe, but I needed closure. I carried a flashlight and wore bright clothing. I stepped under the bridge into mud and bent low to inspect. The footprint detail was clear. I took photos with my phone. 2 deep boot treads, size maybe 10 or 12, with a unique pattern. The cloth fragment stuck to one edge, a stray scrap of cloth, now easier to see. Thick denim, maybe blue fraying. I pried it free with a twig and placed it in a plastic bag. Then I looked around. Nothing. No sound but wind rustling corn. No movement. I stood up and felt vulnerable, exposed. I snapped the flashlight off, walked carefully back to my car. My hands trembled. Over the next days, I researched missing persons reports for the area. I searched online news. Nothing referencing anyone missing, no crime reports, no accidents on that road. I visited the small town's one police station and showed them the photos I'd taken and the cloth sample. They took notes and promised to log everything. They said someone might have walked through, but there were no reports. They thanked me, gave me a contact. I drove away feeling emptier but slightly better. Weeks passed. I returned to normal, though I avoided that road when I could. I still woke sometimes sweaty, hearing the tires crack on gravel, seeing the light cone cut off behind me. Then one morning I saw a news alert. A tourist had gone missing crossing farmland roads west of the city. A hiker from months earlier, white male, tall, last seen near those rural roads on the night when I saw the pickup and the footprints. A farm vehicle reported seeing someone matching his description crossing the road near that bridge. They found his abandoned pack down by the creek bed. The body was recovered eventually. The news article showed photo of his backpack. Same denim patches I recognized. The police confirmed the cloth fragment I'd handed and had matching DNA. They thanked me again and reopened the case officially. After that follow-up, I felt weight lift. Not because tragedy happened, but because I wasn't imagining it. Because someone had survived long enough to leave those prints and the item and now had answers. I knew his name, the hours he traveled before falling or being hurt. I knew that my noticing something small, the footprints, that rag, helped them eventually solve where and when. I look back now and feel strange gratitude. The drive that should have been routine turned me into a witness, and my fear gave way to determination to act. In the end, there was closure for the victim's family. The case didn't involve ghosts or fairy tales, just human error, misfortune, and road's dark stretch at night. But because I didn't ignore the feeling of wrongness, checked inside the bridge, gave in the cloth, they found a name, they found closure. It changed me. I avoid that stretch when I can, but I don't avoid remembering. And I sleep more soundly now, because the ending was clear, a missing person found, a family able to grieve properly, a mystery solved. And though I carry the memory of that cold road in my mind, there's peace in knowing it led to something good rather than nothing. I don't usually tell this story, mostly because when I try, it sounds like nothing. On the surface, it's just a bad hike gone wrong. But it changed me in ways I didn't expect. Things like this don't leave scars on your skin. They leave them deep in your brain, where they play themselves over and over, especially when everything else is quiet. It started on a weekend I had free, one of the few I got that spring. I was working full-time, and life felt too routine, just work, eat, sleep. I'd been craving something to shake me up a little, and I decided to go solo hiking for a couple of days. Nothing extreme, just a long trail I'd never done before, up north, where the land flattens out and turns to pine woods and empty space. I picked a remote trail near an old fire lookout tower, about 4 hours out of the city. The area had been logged heavily in the past, but the forest had grown back thick and wild. A lot of hikers avoided it because it wasn't scenic, and there were no lakes or mountain views. But I liked the idea of being completely alone. I packed light. Just a small tent, a sleeping bag, some high-calorie snacks, a bottle with a filter, a first aid kit, headlamp, spare batteries, phone, power bank, and a printed map of the area since service was supposed to be spotty. I had a cheap folding knife clipped to my belt and a bare whistle, though I didn't think I'd need either. The forecast showed clear skies, mild wind, mid-50s during the day and low 30s at night. I left early Saturday morning, reached the trailhead by 10 a.m., parked my car off the dirt road, and locked it up tight. There were no other cars parked there. I remember that clearly. The trail wasn't marked very well, but I found the old wooden sign and started walking. The woods felt dead quiet compared to what I was used to. I grew up near a forested area, but even there, birds chirped and squirrels ran across the underbrush. Out here, it felt like someone had hit mute. Just the sound of wind through the trees and my boots crunching dead pine needles. I walked for hours, trying not to think too much, just letting my mind drift. I didn't see a single person, not even a plane overhead. By late afternoon, I had reached the fork where the trail split. One path led toward the old fire tower, and the other looped back eventually to a gravel road that circled the forest. I chose the one toward the tower. I figured I could set up camp somewhere close and check it out in the morning. I hiked another couple miles until the sun started to drop. I found a small clearing just off the trail, not too exposed, but flat and dry. I set up my tent, laid out my bag, and got a small snack going, jerky, dried fruit, and a protein bar. I didn't make a fire. I didn't really need one, and I didn't want the smell to attract anything. As I settled in, that silence crept in again. I don't know how else to explain it. It wasn't just quiet. It was wrong. I kept pausing, expecting to hear something. Anything. A deer, an owl, even a mosquito. But nothing. It was like being underwater. I checked my phone. 1 bar, then no service. Battery still good. I shut it off to save power and zipped up my tent. I didn't sleep great. I was warm enough, but I kept waking up. Every time I opened my eyes, I'd just stare at the top of the tent, trying to figure out why I felt so alert. My body wasn't tired, even though I'd walked all day. I guess it was the stillness. My ears strained in the dark, searching for something to tune into. At some point around 2 a.m., I heard a distant snap. Just one. Could have been a tree settling. Could have been a branch falling. Could have been nothing. But it didn't feel like nothing. I laid there, barely breathing. It didn't repeat. No rustling, no footsteps. Eventually, I must have fallen back asleep because the next thing I remember was light creeping into the tent. I got up slowly, stretched out my sore legs, and made some instant coffee. I didn't see any animal tracks near my tent. Nothing looked touched. I packed up and kept walking. The trail narrowed and got rougher. I started to see signs of old logging, massive stumps, some with metal wedges still buried in them. Eventually, I reached the fire tower around noon. It was rusted, leaning slightly, with missing steps and a half-collapsed platform at the top. It didn't look safe, but I climbed halfway up just to look around. Trees stretched in every direction, and I could see the faint line of the trail I came in on. That was it. No roads, no buildings, no movement. Just endless forest. I stayed there for a while, chewing a granola bar and drinking water, then started heading back. The plan was to take a side loop trail that would eventually lead me to the gravel road, where I could follow it back to my car. The first couple miles were fine. I even started to relax again, telling myself I was just overthinking everything. Then I saw the shoe. It was off the trail, maybe 20 feet into the woods. A single hiking boot, laying on its side like it had been flung there. It looked fairly new, not worn out or damaged. I stopped walking. Something about it just made my stomach clench. It wasn't old, and it wasn't part of any trash or debris. It looked like it had been taken off recently, or ripped off. I stood there for a while, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. No sound. I thought about going to check it out, but something told me not to. My hands were suddenly sweating, and my chest felt tight. I backed away slowly and kept walking. A few minutes later, I heard something behind me. Just for a second, like something moving quickly, then stopping. I whipped around. Nothing. Just trees and shadows. I waited, straining my ears, but heard nothing else. My legs started to move on their own. I walked faster. Every few minutes I'd glance over my shoulder. Nothing ever moved, but the feeling didn't go away. I made it to the gravel road around 4 p.m. From there, I had a straight shot back to where I parked, maybe 2 hours away if I moved fast. I was already thinking about what I'd say when I got home. Probably nothing. People would just tell me I spooked myself. The first sign something was wrong came when I passed an old metal gate. I hadn't passed it on the way in, but it looked like it had been there for a long time. Rusted shut. Beyond it, there was a narrow road, barely visible through the brush, leading to what looked like an old shack, or maybe a trailer far back in the woods. I paused, staring at it. Something about that place made my spine go cold. The windows were black, and the door looked like it was barely hanging on. Then I saw the second shoe, right at the edge of the gravel road, half covered in pine needles. Same kind as before. It didn't make any sense. My skin crawled. I kept moving. My pace turned into a jog, even though my pack bounced uncomfortably with every step. I just wanted to get to the car. I didn't want to look behind me anymore. I didn't want to hear anything. But I did. Somewhere off to my right, deep in the trees, something was moving. Slowly. Deliberately. Not bounding or running. Just following. Keeping pace. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. I didn't run. I wanted to, but something told me not to. I kept walking fast, my eyes darting side to side. The sun had started to dip behind the trees again, casting everything in a dim, yellow light. My head throbbed. I passed a spot that looked like a campsite, long abandoned. Fire ring full of ash. Rusted can near a log. No sign of people. No backpacks. No footprints. Just stillness. Then I saw something that made my knees go weak. A tree, maybe 50 feet off the road, had fresh scratches in it. Deep ones. Long vertical gouges, like someone had taken a knife and dragged it down hard. The bark was still curling at the edges. The cuts were fresh. They were also high up, far above where a person could reach without climbing. But there were no claw marks. Just deep, clean cuts. I stopped walking again. My hands shook. I felt sick. I kept going. Every now and then, I'd hear something again, behind me, to the side, once even what sounded like breathing. But every time I stopped and turned, there was nothing. I started to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. I talked to myself under my breath, told myself to just get to the car. I don't know how long I walked like that, shaky, barely blinking, every part of me on fire with nerves. When I finally saw the bend in the road that led to the parking area, my legs nearly gave out from relief. I could see my car, still there, dusty and alone under the trees. I ran the last few steps, fumbled with my keys, got inside, locked the doors, sat there with the engine off for 10 full minutes before I started it. The woods behind me were quiet. I drove until I hit pavement again, then kept going until I reached a gas station an hour later. I sat there at the pump, staring at nothing for a while. Eventually, I filled up and went home. I didn't tell anyone what happened. There wasn't really anything to tell. Nothing happened, exactly. But that silence, that constant presence, just out of sight, that boot, that was over 2 years ago. I haven't gone hiking alone since. The thing that sticks with me isn't what I saw, but what I didn't. Whatever was out there knew I was there. It wanted me to know I was being followed, but it never showed itself. That's the part that haunts me. That it was patient. That it let me leave. That it could have stopped me if it wanted to. But it didn't. And I don't know why. It started with something as simple as a favor. My coworker had a family emergency and asked if I could cover their weekend shift at the security firm. It was a site I'd never worked before, an industrial equipment yard about 20 minutes outside of town, near the edge of the woods. They used to have 2 guards rotate on the weekends, but recently the company cut back to 1 person for the night shift, figuring the cameras and locked gates were enough. I didn't have plans anyway, so I said yes. I'd worked security for 5 years, mostly at office buildings or construction sites, so I wasn't nervous. Most nights were just sitting in a chair, watching grainy feeds from cameras that never caught anything more exciting than a raccoon knocking over a trash can. I arrived at the site around 7:30 p.m. on Saturday, just as the sun was starting to drop. The yard was a flat stretch of gravel surrounded by a tall chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Inside were rows of parked flatbeds, pallets stacked with metal pipes and equipment, and a small prefabricated office trailer. It looked like the kind of place where everything had a thick layer of dust on it, and nothing moved unless someone made it move. I signed in, locked the front gate behind me with a heavy-duty padlock, and walked the perimeter once to get a feel for the layout. There were 4 camera towers, 1 at each corner of the yard, plus some floodlights on tall poles that flickered on as the last light left the sky. The office trailer had a small bathroom, a cracked leather swivel chair, and a desk with a bunch of security monitors patched into an outdated computer system. It wasn't much, but it was dry, and it had a space heater under the desk. By 9 p.m., I'd already walked another lap, checked the locks on the storage containers, and settled in with my thermos of coffee. The cameras showed the same thing over and over, nothing. Rows of metal and gravel and stillness. That's what makes security jobs dull, but also easy. You get paid to be bored. Around 11:15 p.m., I stepped out to stretch my legs. It was dead quiet. Not just the kind of quiet where nothing's happening, but the deep, heavy kind of quiet that presses on your ears. No wind, no bugs, nothing. Just silence and the distant hum of a transformer somewhere out by the road. I heard it just as I was walking past the 3rd row of parked trailers. A metallic clunk, sharp and distinct, from somewhere deeper in the yard. I stopped immediately. Sound carries weird in places like that, open, flat, surrounded by steel and fences. I listened again. Nothing. Just stillness. It could have been anything. A truck settling, a pipe slipping, or something knocked over by a stray animal. But I figured I should check it out. That's the job, after all. I made my way toward the noise, shining my flashlight between the equipment stacks. The beam caught reflective metal, rusty hinges, and weather-beaten tarps. Everything was still. Then I heard it again, another clunk, this one closer. Not something falling, something being moved. I froze. My brain instantly ran through the possibilities. Maybe someone climbed over the fence before I locked it. Maybe someone was already hiding in the yard when I arrived. It wasn't impossible. The site backed right up to a dense patch of woods. Someone could slip in unnoticed if they timed it right. I kept walking, slower this time, careful not to kick gravel. My flashlight beam danced over the tops of the trailers, between the stacks of equipment, trying to find the source. That's when I saw the open container. I knew for a fact that I'd checked and locked all 3 shipping containers during my first walk. They had those sliding bolt locks with thick padlocks on them. This one was wide open, the lock dangling from the door, like someone had cut it. I moved closer, my flashlight pointing into the darkness of the container. It was filled with coiled wire, tools, and large spools of tubing. Nothing looked obviously disturbed, but it was hard to tell. I didn't want to step inside. Something about the stillness of it, the way the light barely reached the back wall. It felt wrong. As I turned back toward the trailer to radio it in, I heard fast footsteps behind me, crunching gravel. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped my flashlight. Nothing. The yard was empty. Every shadow stretched out long under the floodlights. Every corner looked darker than the last. I started backing toward the trailer. I didn't run. I didn't want to. If someone was messing around, I didn't want to look like I panicked. But my heart was hammering. Something was off. Really off. I reached the trailer and locked the door behind me. Not that it would stop anyone determined. I sat down in the chair, turned up the heater, and started cycling through the camera feeds. Most of them were too grainy to be useful, but I watched them anyway. Nothing moved. No figure, no car, no motion in the trees. Nothing. I tried the intercom system to announce a warning, but the speakers were broken. I thought about calling the site manager, but I didn't want to seem jumpy. Instead, I decided I'd do another walk at midnight, and if I heard anything else, I'd call it in. 12 o'clock came. I grabbed my flashlight again and stepped outside. The temperature had dropped fast. You could see your breath hanging in the air, thick and white. The gravel crunched underfoot like glass. I made it halfway through the yard before I noticed it. New footprints in the gravel. Not mine. These were wider apart, deeper. Someone had been running. They came from the far fence line, weaved between the storage units, and disappeared behind the back row of flatbeds. I followed them cautiously, sweeping the flashlight ahead of me. When I got to the last row, I saw it. The gate on the rear fence, the one that hadn't been used in months, was wide open. The chain was on the ground, padlock still attached, like it had been cut clean through and dropped. That didn't make sense. The gate had been secured from the inside. The only way to open it was from the yard. I looked out past the fence into the woods. Nothing but trees and darkness. I shut the gate and rewrapped the chain as best I could, but I didn't have another lock. That made me nervous. If someone had come in that way, they could be watching right now. Hell, they could still be in the yard. I made my way back faster, almost jogging. I checked the office door again, made sure it was locked tight, then sat down and rewound the camera feed on the back fence. Around 10:47 p.m., the feed glitched briefly, static and white lines across the screen, then cleared up again. No motion alerts. No footage of the gate opening. It was like the cameras missed it completely. The rest of the night, I barely moved. I watched the monitors, stared at every corner of the yard, and listened. I heard soft sounds now and then, clinks, crunches, whispers of motion, but I couldn't place them. I stayed inside until sunrise, then signed out and left without waiting for the next shift to arrive. That should have been the end of it. I told the manager about the broken lock, the open container, and the footprints. They checked the inventory. Nothing was missing. No sign of forced entry at the main gate. They said maybe the locks were old and gave out. Maybe a deer kicked something over. Maybe I imagined it. 2 weeks passed. I didn't go back to that site. I worked my normal shifts downtown, forgot about it. Until one morning, I got a call from my supervisor. They needed someone to check on the equipment yard. No one had answered the phone there in over a day, and the guy who was supposed to be on shift hadn't returned his key card. I didn't want to go, but I also didn't want to say no. I arrived just after noon. Broad daylight. Sun blazing, no clouds. The place looked exactly the same, quiet, dusty still. I unlocked the gate and stepped inside. The office trailer door was open. That was the first bad sign. Inside, the chair was knocked over. The monitors were off. The space heater was melted into the carpet, like it had overheated and shorted out. There were coffee grounds scattered across the desk, and the thermos was on the floor. But no sign of the guard. I walked the yard again. Everything looked untouched. Containers locked. Trucks parked. No signs of a break-in. But the rear gate, yeah, it was wide open again. The same broken chain on the ground. Same deep footprints in the gravel. Only this time they went in both directions, coming in and going out. I didn't follow them. I left the yard, called the supervisor, and told them what I saw. The police came out, did a search, found nothing. The guard's car was still in the lot. His phone was on the desk inside. But him? Gone. They eventually wrote it off as him walking off the job. Said maybe he got tired and quit without telling anyone. But nobody quits without taking their wallet, their keys, their phone. Nobody leaves a warm cup of coffee sitting on the desk in the middle of the night. After that, the site was shut down temporarily. They installed new locks, upgraded the cameras. But I never went back. Sometimes I still think about that yard, about how someone got in twice without being seen, about how the cameras glitched only at the exact moment they needed to, about the deep footprints in the gravel and the silent woods behind the fence. And every so often, I wonder if someone or something was watching me that night. Not a ghost, not some storybook creature, just a person, one who knows how to move quietly, cut through fences, and disappear into the trees without a trace. And that thought is scarier than any ghost story I've ever heard, because it's real. because it could happen again. Because the only thing keeping people safe at night is the idea that someone is watching. But when the person watching disappears too, who's left? I woke up to a dim light filtering through the curtain. I was lying on the cold wooden floor of an old warehouse. My head pounded, and my mouth tasted of dust and metal. I pushed myself up, stunned by the emptiness around me. I couldn't remember how I ended up here. The big open room smelled like damp concrete, rust, and machine oil. I could feel sweat trickling down my back, even though the air was still and heavy. My clothes were dirty and torn. I checked my hands and saw smudges of grease and dirt under my nails. I staggered to my feet and took in my surroundings. Rows of tall metal shelves stood in the gloom, most of them empty or half full of broken equipment. I saw pipes running along the ceiling, dripping water into puddles on the rough floor. My heartbeat echoed in my ears as I tried to recall what happened before. Nothing came, just flashes, running, a crashing sound, a bright light, then darkness. I took a step and nearly stumbled over something. I looked down, a toolbox lying open, a wrench lying a few feet away. My mind flashed. Had I been working here? But I had never been here before. I clenched my fists, trying to steady myself. I needed to make sense of it. I heard a faint thump in the distance. My heart jumped. Only one of many sounds in this place, but in the silence, even a small noise felt threatening. I moved slowly across the room, each footstep loud. I scanned for exits. A heavy steel door at one end, slightly ajar, letting in a sliver of daylight. I felt a surge of hope. I walked toward it, hearing my breath rasp in my throat. But as I moved, I noticed odd stains on the floor. They looked like dried footprints, muddied, leading from the door into the deeper part of the warehouse. My stomach twisted. I was not alone here. I stopped. I listened. Silence. But the oppressive quiet weighed on me. I realized fear wasn't about noises. It was about what might be hidden in the silence. I gripped the wrench I had found. I felt foolish, but I wanted something in my hand. I took a step off the beaten path. The floor was slick, slightly cold. I traced the path of footprints. They were larger than mine, muddy, messy. They led deeper into shadow. I moved along the footprints, scanning the shelves. On one shelf, I saw an old hard hat, scratched and dented. Nearby, an oil can leaking. I stepped closer, noticing a small notebook on the shelf. I picked it up. The pages were water-stained, smudged with ink. I flipped through, sketches of pipes, crude notes listing dates and numbers. The last entry said, check valve at end of line. If no fix, shut off all power. May need to evacuate. No date, no signature. But the pages had that same chemical smell as the room. Someone had worked here. I heard another noise, a distant hiss like air leaking. My chest tightened. I realized that might be a gas leak or steam. I didn't know. I crept toward the sound, careful to keep low. The concrete floor dipped slightly down into another chamber. I crossed the threshold. Inside, large cylindrical tanks lined the walls, rusted, stained. Pipes snaked from them. The hiss grew louder. One pipe had a crack, from which steam escaped. I saw near it a muddy shape, like someone crouched or collapsed. I steeled myself and moved closer. It was a person, a man slumped over. He wore industrial gear, muddy boots, torn jacket, gas mask hanging from his neck. He didn't move. I froze. My brain screamed to run, but I edged closer. I touched his shoulder. Cold. Lifeless. I swallowed. How long had he been here? I checked his pulses, nothing. I crouched beside him, heart fluttering. I looked at his face. It was caked in dirt, pale, eyes closed. I pulled my phone from my pocket. It had a crack across the screen, but still lit up. No signal. 37% battery. I sighed. I stood and surveyed the room. If that man had died here, what had happened? A leak, a collapse, a poison? I felt fear and determination mix. I needed to leave. I took the wrench and tapped the crack in the pipe. Steam hissed louder. I jumped back. If that pipe burst, the steam could scald me. I looked for a valve. On the wall near the base of the pipe was a red wheel. I approached cautiously. The hose next to it vibrated. I placed my wrench on the nut holding it. I turned the valve slowly. The hiss diminished. Steam thickened, then slowed. The pressure dropped. I exhaled. My ears rang. I realized I needed fresh air. I checked the lifeless man again. I stood. Should I drag him? I shook my head. I didn't know who he was, but he was beyond help. I retraced my steps, leaving the body behind, but marking the path in memory in case anyone else came. I thought, maybe someone else is still here with me. I held the wrench tight and moved carefully toward the steel door I had seen before. As I approached, I stepped on something small and metal. It clanged. I looked down, a key ring with several keys. They must have fallen from his pocket. I set it aside in case. I slowed. I didn't want to alert anyone. My breathing shallow. At the door, I peered through the gap. Outside was a narrow corridor lit by pale daylight filtering in through high windows. I could see beyond that an open yard and some trucks parked outside. A way out. I pressed myself flat and peeked around. The corridor looked empty, but the footprints continued beyond the door, heading past a gate that stood half open. I considered rushing, but I paused. Another footstep? No. Footprints didn't move. I exhaled. I edged forward and pushed the door open with the wrench as a lever, careful. It creaked. I froze. Nothing happened. I slipped through. The corridor walls were lined with old posters peeling. The floor dusty but showing footprints in one direction. I followed the corridor, keeping to the side and listening. I reached the gate. It led to an open yard. The ground was overgrown with weeds and broken pavement. I saw beyond the yard a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. To one side, several trucks and a van. I moved silently between them. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. I needed to reach a road. I looked around at the warehouse wall edge and saw a gap leading to a back street. Good. I started walking toward the street, stepping carefully over uneven ground. My legs felt weak. I was shaking. My head still pounded, but I kept moving. When I was a few meters from the fence, I heard a distant shout. My heart jumped. I ducked behind a truck. The shout repeated. "Hey, you!" It sounded urgent. I froze. Footsteps somewhere behind. I squinted toward the warehouse. A door at the far corner opened, and a figure appeared, silhouetted by light. Panic rose. I gripped the wrench. I weighed my choices, fight or run. I didn't want trouble. I ducked behind the truck, held my breath, and crept toward the fence gap I had seen. The footsteps drew nearer. Voices muffled. I made it to the gap and squeezed through into the street. The voice said again, "Don't go," but echoes only. I hobbled down the street, turning a corner into a residential area. I paused in front of a house. I looked for someone. I saw a man in a shirt looking out a window. I lifted my hand in weak greeting and knocked. The man opened the door, eyes wide. I stumbled in. Inside, the air smelled clean. He sat me on a couch, offered water. I drank. I tried to speak, but only managed a short gasp. He called emergency. I collapsed on the couch. Later, after paramedics arrived, they asked questions. I had no answers. They took me to a hospital. I was examined. Minor dehydration, bruises, a deep cut on my forehead patched by stitches. They treated me kindly. They asked again about what happened. I could only say, I don't know. I remember the warehouse, the man, the hiss, the footprints. But no names. No reason I was there. Over the next days I recovered. Local news reported a missing person found dead in an abandoned industrial facility on the outskirts of town. The man I had found died of sudden gas inhalation. Investigators found the quarterly inspection notebook referencing faulty pipe valves. They claimed negligence. They asked if I could identify the man or the company. I told them no names. I just remembered his equipment notebook. A week later, they called me. They matched the notebook with that company's records. They got his name. They found his family. They thanked me. I realized my finding him may help them bring some closure. The investigators also shut down the warehouse, repaired the leaks, and improved safety. No one else got hurt. As for me, I went home. I cleaned my clothes, showered, smelled clean air. I slept deeply that night and in the following days. I still woke once in a while, heart pounding, remembering the hiss, the smell, the cold, hard floor. But I felt relief. I wasn't haunted by visions. I wasn't chased. I escaped. I survived. I had acted. I had saved what I could, and indirectly helped those left behind. I think about him sometimes. A man doing his job, quietly alone. He died, but I found him. I helped bring his story out from that dark place. I didn't know his name then, but now I do. And because of that, the warehouse is safer, and his family knows. In that sense, the ending is clear. I came out alive, they came to understand, and changes were made. The nightmare of that place ended, not with ghosts or fairy tale curses, but with truth, accountability, and the simple power of one person choosing to move forward, step by step in reality, until the door opened and daylight came. It started on a Thursday, right after I got off work. I work a delivery job, nothing fancy, just local stuff for a small construction supply company in a mid-sized town. I'd had a rough week. My manager was breathing down my neck, my truck's air conditioner had died again, and the summer heat was brutal. By the time I pulled back into the company lot around 6 p.m., I just wanted to be away from everything. I remember sitting in the cab of the truck for a few minutes, engine off, sweat sticking my shirt to the seat, just staring through the cracked windshield, not thinking about much, just numb. Then I remembered I had 3 days off. No plans, no obligations. For a second, I thought about just sleeping through the weekend, but then something hit me. I needed air. Real air. Space. Something different. I'd been to this old fire lookout tower about 2 hours out of town before, back when I was still dating Emily. It was deep in the hills, surrounded by pine forests, and far from any cell signal. It wasn't an official camping spot, so I knew no one would be there. I decided right then that I was going to pack up and head out first thing in the morning. I didn't tell anyone. No real reason, I just wanted to be completely alone. I packed light, sleeping bag, water, food for a couple of days, a flashlight, knife, lighter, tarp, and a solar power bank for emergencies. I also threw in a small hatchet I had lying around, even though I didn't expect to use it. I left early, around 6:30 a.m., to beat the heat. The drive out was peaceful. The roads narrowed the further I got from town, the pavement eventually giving way to gravel, and then to dirt. By the time I reached the base of the hill with the fire tower, my truck was coated in dust. There's no real path up to the tower, just an old overgrown road that leads most of the way up before stopping abruptly. I parked at the end and hiked the rest. It was about half a mile of uphill, but nothing too steep. The tower looked the same as I remembered, old but solid, rust on the bolts, some graffiti on the bottom floor, but the structure itself was intact. It stood about 40 feet tall, with a narrow metal staircase wrapping around the legs up to a small wooden room at the top. The windows were broken in places, but the floor was still sturdy. I set up my tarp across the open windows to block the wind and laid out my sleeping bag on the old wooden floor. I sat there for a while, legs hanging over the edge, looking out across the endless green. No other buildings, no people, no noise except the trees moving in the breeze. It felt perfect. The first day went by quietly. I ate a few sandwiches I'd packed, cracked open a beer, and just sat with my feet up. I walked a little ways into the woods before sunset, not far, just exploring. I didn't bring a gun, maybe that was stupid, but the area didn't have bears or anything dangerous, just the usual deer and raccoons. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. No sirens, no headlights flashing through windows, no phone buzzing next to my head. The second day, I woke early. The morning air was cold and still. I boiled some water for coffee over a small camp stove, then decided to do a longer walk. I followed the dirt trail back down to the truck, then kept going along a narrower footpath that weaves through the forest. I walked maybe an hour, just listening to birds and the sound of sticks cracking under my boots. At some point, I noticed something odd, a pair of tire tracks in the dirt, newer than the others I'd seen. They didn't go far, just a short turnoff that led to a small flat spot cleared in the trees. Maybe someone had camped there recently. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured maybe a hunter or some hikers had come through. That afternoon, I mostly stayed around the tower, cooked some rice and beans on the stove, took a few pictures of the sunset, and read a book I'd brought. It wasn't until just after dusk that something started to feel off. I'd set up my flashlight hanging from a nail in the ceiling, dimmed it low to save battery, and was lying on my sleeping bag with the book when I heard what sounded like gravel shifting. Not a big noise, just a soft scrape, like someone's shoe on a rocky patch. I froze. Then it happened again, closer. I got up slowly and turned the flashlight toward the open window. Nothing. I leaned out and listened. Silence. The wind had died completely, and the forest was too quiet. No crickets, no owls, nothing. I waited. Maybe 5 minutes passed. Then from somewhere below the tower, not right under it, but close, I heard something. Not gravel this time. It sounded like a soft, short cough. Not an animal sound. A human cough. I stood there, not moving. The hair on my arms stood up. It didn't happen again. I didn't see anyone. I stayed up late that night, staring out the windows, flashlight in hand, listening for any more sounds. I didn't hear anything else. Eventually, I lay back down, but I didn't really sleep. Just drifted in and out, every sound making me flinch. Morning came, gray and overcast. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I heard a fox or something dragging across the gravel. I wanted to believe that, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been nearby. I made a quick breakfast and decided to walk back down to the truck just to check on it. When I got there, I noticed right away that something was wrong. The truck was fine, not broken into, but the dirt around the tires had fresh prints in it. Boot prints. Not mine. Someone had walked around the truck. Not just once either. There were loops and a few spots where someone had stood still for a while. I knelt down and looked closer. The tread wasn't familiar. Big soles, maybe size 11 or 12. Could have been work boots. There were even heel marks near the back, as if someone had been crouching behind it. I stood up, heart pounding. I turned in a slow circle, looking through the trees. I didn't see anyone. The air felt heavy. I thought about just leaving, packing up and driving out. But I told myself again that maybe it was an old set of tracks. Maybe I just didn't notice them before. I didn't fully believe that, but I needed to keep calm. I walked back to the tower faster than usual. My mouth was dry by the time I reached the stairs. I stayed up in the tower the rest of the day. I didn't leave. I kept the flashlight close, and the hatchet too. Every little noise in the trees made me jump. As the sun started to drop, I blocked the windows with the tarp again, trying to keep from being seen from outside. I turned off the flashlight and waited in the dark, just lying still listening. Around 9 p.m., I heard footsteps on the stairs. Not running, not sneaking, just steady, slow steps, metal creaking under weight. One step at a time. I sat up, silent. I had the hatchet in one hand, flashlight in the other. The steps stopped about halfway up. Then nothing. I stayed frozen, heart hammering, for what felt like an hour. Finally, I turned on the flashlight and shone it out through the tarp. Nothing moved. I didn't hear the steps go down. I didn't hear anything else that night. At first light, I packed everything. I didn't eat, didn't even finish my water. I moved fast, heart racing the whole time. I looked down the stairs and around the legs of the tower. No one. No tracks I could see, but the dirt was hard packed up there. When I got to the truck, I found a small pile of rocks stacked neatly on the hood. 5 stones, balanced carefully. I hadn't put them there. I hadn't seen them the day before. My hands shook as I brushed them off. I threw my gear in the back, slammed the door, and started the engine. I drove fast, barely slowing for turns, tires slipping on the gravel. I didn't stop until I hit pavement. I kept checking the rearview mirror. Every tree looked like someone was standing behind it. Back home, I didn't talk to anyone about it. What could I say? I didn't even know what had happened. No one had attacked me. No one spoke to me. But someone was there, watching me, walking around my truck, climbing those stairs, leaving those rocks. A few days later, I finally told my coworker Ben. He's older, kind of a loner too. He just nodded and said I was lucky. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. I haven't been back to the tower since. I haven't camped alone either. I keep thinking about those footsteps. The way they stopped halfway. Like someone wanted me to know they were there, but didn't want to be seen. Whatever it was, whoever it was, they weren't passing through. They weren't lost. They knew that place. They knew I was alone. They waited. They watched. And they were just one floor below me. I huddled in my little rented apartment downtown, the hum of traffic outside like a distant heartbeat pushing me into uneasy restlessness. It was late, past midnight, and the pale glow from the street lamp seeped through the thin curtains into the living room. Everything felt heavy, even the air. I lay on the couch, my head propped on folded blankets, listening to the quiet rhythm of the building settling around me. It was one of those nights where every small sound seemed amplified, a settling pipe, wind brushing across the window frame, the faint hum of a refrigerator somewhere down the hall. My chest tightened. I told myself it was stress. Work had been rough. Days blurred, long hours, missed meals, exhaustion. It all built up into a knot in my mind. I got up to stretch, the floor cold beneath bare feet. My apartment was small, bare essentials: couch, second-hand coffee table, small kitchenette, a cluttered desk, a narrow bed in the corner behind a curtain. I hated that curtain. It made the room feel smaller. But I'd put it up for some privacy, to hide the bed from visitors in the living room. Tonight it felt like a flimsy barrier sealing me in a suffocating box. I brushed my hand across its fabric. It shivered slightly, though there were no drafts. My heart kicked up speed. I turned on a dim lamp by the couch. Shadows danced across walls. The lamp's light flickered. I walked over and gently pressed on the lamp's base. It steadied. My breath slowed. I told myself I was being silly. Work deadlines, bills, life worries. That bite on the couch, that flutter across the curtain, just my brain misfiring. I tried to breathe calm. Inhale, exhale. The city slurped and honked and roared beyond the window, ignorant of my inner storm. I looked at the desk piled with documents, open notebooks. I remembered the email I'd sent earlier. Important documents lost in wrong folder. I need to fix this. That stress lingered. I pushed it aside and forced my eyes toward the small digital clock. 12:07 a.m. I closed my eyes for a moment. I heard a faint scrape from the kitchenette, like a small fist dragged across tile. I tensed. One more breath. If I stayed still, maybe it'd go away. Then I heard footsteps, not my own, delicate, soft, sluggish. They came from the hallway just outside my door. My stomach sank. I stood frozen. I didn't want to move. Any sound might betray me. I strained to hear barefoot steps, inching past my door. My chest felt hollow. My heart thundered. The footsteps paused. I imagined the door's latch clicking. I heard nothing else. They resumed, moving away slowly. A faint shudder of air, someone sliding by. My skin crawled. I wanted to call out, but my voice lodged in my throat. Instead, I crept to the door, inch by inch. My hand hovered over the doorknob, cold moisture under my palm. The hallway was dark. The building light flickered dimly. I cracked the door open a hair. Just a sliver of corridor. No one. The silence felt vast and wrong. I realized I hadn't locked the door earlier. It swung inward under my gentle push. I backed away, heart pounding. I locked it with 2 clicks. I heard something else, tapping? No, rustling, from inside the apartment again. I stayed in the living room, away from that curtained bed area. Every breath felt loud. I watched the curtain quiver. I looked and saw nothing, but the shape of that covered space felt ominous. I felt like someone was just behind it. I wanted to run, but I remained where I was. The hours felt infinite. I sat trembling until dawn. Light crept in through the curtains. At around 6:30, the street noise rose again. Engines warming, people stepping outside. I dared to walk over to my bed and peek under the curtain. Nothing. No sign of entry, no footprints, no dropped item. Just my sheets. My heart sank with relief and shame. I felt foolish for panicking, yet still unsettled. I spent the day at work, drained. I planned to move out that weekend. The apartment seemed too small, too frail. That night I packed a small bag, linens and clothes. I told the landlord I was leaving on Sunday. He seemed surprised but understanding. On Saturday I scheduled movers, and a local friend said they'd come early morning. That night, I lay on the bed I hated, but without the curtain this time, floor lamp on, door locked with chain and deadbolt, back to the wall. I forced myself to sleep, but the memory of those steps kept me on edge. I had no idea who or what had moved through my space, or whether I'd imagined it. Sunday morning came. I packed the last box, swept the floor, unplugged the fridge. At noon the movers arrived. We loaded furniture in boxes. The landlord met us at the stairwell, collected the key. I watched the unit's door close behind him. I felt something heavy lift. I exhaled. I moved into a small shared house with 2 roommates. Their place was busier, more lived in, safer. That night I lay in the new room, curtains drawn, door locked. I heard city hum far below, but nothing inside. I slept deeply for the first time in days. Later that week I received a message from the landlord. A tenant below mine, a quiet older woman, said she'd heard footsteps pacing outside her ceiling late at night, tapping on the floor above. She reported thumps and soft dragging sounds. She assumed rats or building strain. The landlord asked me if I'd left a rug or box against the ceiling. I wrote back that I'd had nothing heavy stored there, just books and clothes. They inspected the empty old unit. Inside, the carpet was badly stained. On the floor near where my bed had been, They found scuff marks and faint marks on the wall, like fingernail lines, tiny dark grooves. In the hallway just outside the unit, they noted fresh scratch marks and nicked paint around the latch of the doorframe. The landlord emailed me that he didn't see anything more. He'd assume it was previous tenants or curious animals. I stared at the received images of the scratch marks, like someone had tried to push through the door, and the scuffs near the bed, just in that curtained corner. A deep shiver passed through me. I realized I hadn't imagined everything. Something uninvited had made its way into my space, stepped across the floor, brushed along the curtain, paced, paused, left scratches. It might have been human or something else. I didn't want to know. Still, the ending was good. I'd moved into a better place. My life calmed. The nightmares faded. I never found out who or what had visited me that night. I never heard strange footsteps again. The marks remained on the old apartment's walls, but they had nothing to do with my new life. I felt safe again. Most importantly, I still had my mind. I told myself, sometimes fear isn't made of fantasy. It's made of small, real things that leave no dramatic evidence, just enough doubt. And I learned that fear can fade when you reclaim your space and put daylight between you and the dark unknown. I slept without fear again, secure in routine, surrounded by people who made noise, lights that stayed on, and a locked door that actually stood between me and whatever had come before. The end was clear. I moved out, lived normally thereafter, and never looked back at that apartment. When my daughter was 7, we had just moved into a new house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood. It was an older home, built sometime in the 60s, with creaky floors, wide windows, and a small backyard that butted up against a row of overgrown hedges and a neighbor's rusting chain-link fence. The paint on the siding was faded, the pipes groaned at night, and the kitchen had this strange spot near the sink where the floor dipped slightly, like something underneath had settled unevenly years ago and no one ever bothered to fix it. I was a single mom back then, working long hours at a dentist's office across town. Money was tight, and finding a rental that wasn't either falling apart or completely out of budget had been a nightmare. This place wasn't perfect, but it was clean enough, structurally sound, and close to my daughter's school. I wasn't thrilled about the retro wallpaper in the upstairs hallway or the carpet that had a faint old dog smell baked into it, but I figured we'd get used to it, or at least I would. Kids adapt faster than adults. We moved in during spring break. My daughter, Ellie, was excited. She picked out the bedroom at the end of the hallway upstairs, the one with the bay window and built-in shelves along one wall. She liked that the window seat had a cushion on it already. I liked that the room got the morning light and had a clear view of the backyard, which meant I could keep an eye on her if she ever decided to play out there alone. We unpacked slowly over the week, and by the time school started up again, the house felt mostly livable. The first time Ellie mentioned the smoking, it was about a week after we settled in. I had just come home from work. She was sitting at the dining room table coloring with her markers, her sneakers still on, her backpack dumped in the middle of the kitchen floor like usual. She said it casually, like it was just another weird thing in her day. "Mom, why do you smoke in my room at night?" I blinked at her, caught off guard. "What? Like really late. You come in and sit on the bed. You always smell like smoke." I stared at her for a second, unsure how to respond. I smoked, yeah, had for years, though I'd cut back since she was born. I never smoked in the house, though. Never upstairs. I had rules about that. If I needed a cigarette, I went out onto the porch, even in the winter. "I don't do that, Ellie," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I never smoke in the house, remember? Especially not your room." She frowned. "Well, somebody does. It always smells like smoke." I walked her upstairs and sniffed around her room. Nothing. No ashtray smell, no stale smoke in the air. I checked the windows. They were locked. The floor beneath them was clean. I checked her sheets and pillows and the clothes in her closet. Nothing smelled like cigarettes. I told myself maybe she had a dream. Maybe a smell from outside drifted in through a vent. The neighbors smoked on their patio sometimes, and we'd smelled it before from the kitchen door. I reminded her of that, kissed her on the head, and moved on. But she kept bringing it up. Every few days, she'd mention it again, in that offhand way kids do when something's been bugging them, but they're not sure why. She'd say someone came in and sat on her bed, that the smell always showed up late at night, that she woke up and it felt like someone had just left. I never heard a thing. I started to get weirded out after the second week. I checked the smoke alarms. They worked fine. I walked the entire upstairs each night after she fell asleep, just to be sure. I even cleaned out the heating vents and replaced the filters, thinking maybe there was something lingering from the previous owners. Still, nothing changed. The house was old, and it had its quirks. The upstairs bathroom faucet rattled when you turned it on too fast. The doors didn't close all the way unless you pulled them hard. At night, the floorboards popped and creaked with changes in temperature, and the fridge made this low hum that sounded almost like murmuring if you were half asleep. But none of that explained what Ellie kept saying, and it definitely didn't explain what happened next. A few weeks into the new school term, Ellie's teacher called me in for a parent-teacher conference. Nothing unusual. Ellie was doing fine in class, maybe a little distracted lately, but nothing to worry about. After we went over her grades, the teacher paused, looked at me a little sideways, and then asked which bedroom Ellie was sleeping in. I was confused by the question. I told her it was the room at the end of the hall with the bay window. Her expression changed. It was subtle, but there was something behind her eyes. Unease, maybe. Recognition. She said, "I don't want to step on any toes or upset you, but Ellie mentioned something to me the other day. She said someone smokes in her room at night, and that you told her it's not you." I braced myself. I expected a lecture. I expected her to tell me that even if I wasn't smoking in the room, the smell must be getting on my clothes and bothering my kid. I was ready to defend myself, but that wasn't what she said. Instead, she told me that the house we were living in used to belong to her in-laws. Her mother-in-law had died a few years back. The woman had emphysema and wasn't supposed to be smoking at all, but she was stubborn. Apparently, her favorite secret place to sneak a few drags was in what used to be the guest bedroom, the room that was now my daughter's. She'd sit on the edge of the bed by the window with a towel shoved under the door and smoke as quietly as she could, hoping not to get caught. She even had a little metal ashtray she kept hidden under the window seat cushion. The teacher told me that, after her death, the family swore they still smelled cigarette smoke in that room from time to time, usually late at night. They thought maybe it had sunk into the walls, or maybe they just imagined it. I didn't know what to say. I thanked her, said I'd look into it, and went home with a weird feeling in my chest. I didn't believe in ghosts. I still don't, but something about what she said stuck with me. The smoking, the sitting on the bed, the timing, all of it lined up. That night, after Ellie fell asleep, I went into her room with a flashlight. I pulled back the cushion on the window seat, and sure enough, there was a small metal ashtray wedged into the corner of the frame, almost out of reach. I held it up to my nose. It still smelled faintly of cigarettes, even after all that time. I got rid of it the next day, threw it out in the dumpster behind the grocery store. I also cleaned out the closet and vacuumed under the bed and along the walls. I even used this heavy-duty odor eliminator spray I found online, meant for getting rid of years of built-up smoke residue. For a while, the smell stopped. Ellie didn't say anything for a few weeks, and I let myself believe it was over. Maybe it was psychological. Maybe the idea of the smoking had wormed its way into her brain, and the removal of the ashtray was enough to break that loop. But then, about a month later, she mentioned it again. I was tucking her in, and she wrinkled her nose and said, "I smelled it again last night. Just a little." Someone sat down for a minute and then left. I was too tired to deal with it that night. But once she was asleep, I stayed awake, sitting on the floor outside her door with a book in my lap and a glass of water. I waited. Around 1:30 in the morning, I caught the smell. It was faint, almost nothing, but it was there. Not fresh smoke, but the stale, clinging kind, like someone had just walked in after finishing a cigarette outside. I stood up, opened the door slowly, and stepped inside. Ellie was asleep. Her covers were kicked off one leg, her hair a tangled mess on the pillow. The room was quiet, still, but the smell was there. I didn't see anyone. Nothing moved. The window was still locked. The air was warm, dry, and yet it felt like I wasn't alone. I didn't sleep much that night. After that, I started noticing little things. Items in the house not quite where I left them. A book closed on the table when I remembered leaving it open. A spoon in the wrong drawer. My keys on the counter instead of the hook. Small things. Things that could easily be chalked up to distraction or fatigue. But they added up. I started documenting everything, writing it down in a notebook. Times, dates, what I smelled or noticed. I kept track of the nights when Ellie mentioned the smoke and compared them with what I experienced. There was a pattern. It always happened between 1 and 3 a.m., always in her room, never downstairs, never in my room, always just there. One night, I moved her into my room to sleep. I wanted to test something. I stayed in her room instead, lying on her narrow twin bed, staring up at the ceiling, waiting. The smell came again, like clockwork. No sound, no movement, just the creeping scent of cigarettes and a sudden, inexplicable pressure on the end of the bed, like someone had just sat down. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just lay there, heart pounding, trying to think logically. The house settled. The heater kicked on. Somewhere outside, a dog barked, and the smell lingered. Eventually, it faded. The pressure on the bed lifted. I sat up, turned on the light, and found nothing. I didn't know what to make of it, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending it wasn't happening. So I did what little I could. I rearranged the furniture in Ellie's room, moved the bed away from the window, got rid of the cushion entirely, painted the walls a new color, something bright and different. I replaced the carpet. I even had the vents professionally cleaned again. I was determined to wipe every trace of the past away. It helped, I think. The smells stopped. The little movements, too. Ellie slept through the night more often. She stopped talking about it, stopped asking about the smoke. Eventually, it faded from our daily lives like a dream you only remember pieces of. I never gave her the full story. She was too young to process all that. I just told her I'd made the room smell better, and that nobody was going to sit on her bed anymore. That seemed to satisfy her. Years later, when she was a teenager, she asked me, I was working a contract job up north, in a pretty remote logging region of British Columbia. The company was surveying land for a potential mining project, and I'd been hired to map terrain and help assess erosion risks along a few old, overgrown trails that hadn't been touched in decades. It was July, peak summer, and the bugs were unbearable most days, but I didn't mind the isolation. It paid well, and honestly, being out there in the woods was a break from the noise of everyday life. The company put me up in a cabin about an hour away from the closest town. It wasn't a fancy setup, more like a glorified shed with a cot, a propane stove, and a hand-pumped well about 30 feet out the back. There was no cell service that far out, but I had a satellite radio that I was required to check in with every evening by 7 p.m. sharp. Just a brief update, more for safety than anything else. If I missed a check-in by more than 2 hours, they'd send someone. That rule gave me a sense of comfort, even if I figured I'd never need it. The trail I was assigned to map was an old service road that had mostly been reclaimed by the forest. Half of it was overgrown to the point of being invisible if you didn't know what you were looking for. On the map, it stretched about 6 kilometers up a gradual incline to a ridge, then cut back down toward a stream. That was supposed to be the turnaround point, where I'd take notes on erosion damage and mark flagged points for future drilling tests. The area had been flagged decades ago for mineral potential, but never followed up on. Now they were reconsidering, and I was part of the early push. I started my day around 9 a.m. like usual. I had a routine coffee, gear check, backpack loaded with flagging tape, GPS, extra batteries, energy bars, bug spray, and a small first aid kit. I always carried bear spray too. Even though I hadn't seen one yet, I saw scat often enough to know they were around. My boots were already stiff from drying in the sun, caked with yesterday's mud. The trail was humid that morning. The trees felt especially dense. Even though the sun was out, most of it barely made it through the thick pine and fir canopy overhead. I worked steadily for hours, marking waypoints, taking photos with the GPS camera, flagging turns in the trail. Around noon, I stopped to eat a protein bar, sitting on a moss-covered boulder near a bend in the trail. It was quiet. A little too quiet, maybe, but I figured that was just how deep woods worked. No wind, just the sound of buzzing insects and the occasional snap of a branch somewhere far off. I was maybe 4 kilometers in when I noticed it for the first time, boot prints. They were faint, but there. In a patch of dried mud that hadn't seen rain in at least a week, a partial heel mark and the faint outline of tread. Not mine, too small, and not from the same make of boot. I looked around but didn't see anyone, didn't hear anything. I figured maybe one of the other surveyors had passed through earlier, though I hadn't heard about anyone else working that stretch this week. Still, I made a note and moved on. About 20 minutes later, I spotted something else, an old piece of tarp, faded green and shredded at the edges, draped over a branch about shoulder height. I checked it out. It was crusted in dirt and leaves like it had been there a while, probably from an old supply drop or makeshift camp. There were no signs of recent use, no dry ground underneath, no fresh prints, no gear. Just the tarp and a few rusty food cans nearby. I kept going. About half a kilometer from the ridge, the trail cut sharply uphill through a narrow section with thick underbrush on both sides. I had to push through a bunch of wet branches that clung to my sleeves and whipped back into my face. The GPS told me I was close to the ridge, so I picked up the pace, eager to make the turnaround point before 2 p.m. That's when I heard the sound, a branch snapping, loud and close. I froze, thinking it might be a deer, or worse, a bear. I reached for the bear spray at my hip and slowly turned toward the sound. Nothing, just the trail behind me, empty and still. I waited, breathing slowly, straining my ears. I didn't hear it again. After a while, I convinced myself it was probably a squirrel or something dropping from a tree. It didn't feel right, but I kept going. When I reached the ridge, the view opened up slightly. Through a gap in the trees, I could see across a wide valley, a ribbon of river glittering at the bottom, and hills rising on the far side. It was beautiful. I sat down on a flat rock and pulled out my notebook, scribbling some details, checking the GPS again. Everything matched the map. I worked my way downhill toward the stream. The slope was steep and slick, and I had to use a hiking pole to keep from sliding. About halfway down, I noticed something strange, a plastic water bottle tucked into the crook of a tree root, half buried in leaves. It wasn't mine. It looked relatively new. Not clean, but not old either. That's when the feeling hit me. I wasn't alone. I stood still for a long time listening. The woods around me were completely silent again. No birds, no rustling. Just dead stillness. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. I didn't see anyone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I didn't panic yet. I clipped the bear spray to my chest strap for easier reach and kept going, trying to move casually, but faster. I didn't want to rush and slip on the slope, but I needed to get down, take my last notes, and start back. My gut was churning in a way I hadn't felt in years. I reached the stream around 2:30. The water was low but running. I took a few photos, dropped a flag, and marked the point on the GPS. I crouched by the stream, splashed cold water on my face. That's when I saw the second boot print, clear as day, right at the water's edge, pointed toward the stream. Small, narrow, a different tread from mine. The print was fresh, edges crisp, not yet dried by the sun. I stood up fast, heart pounding in my ears. I scanned the opposite bank. Again, nothing. No movement. No sound. I didn't stop to snack. I didn't sit down. I turned back and started hiking uphill as fast as I could without stumbling. Every few minutes I stopped and looked back, checking the trail. I never saw anyone, but the feeling never went away. It clung to me like sweat. Someone was nearby, watching, following. About halfway up the slope, I heard something again. Not close, but loud enough to cut through the silence. It sounded like a grunt, or maybe a cough, but distorted by distance. I stopped in my tracks. Waited. It didn't repeat. I moved faster. By the time I reached the ridge again, I was soaked in sweat and lightheaded. I forced myself to drink water, but my hands were shaking so badly I spilled half of it. I thought about using the satellite radio, but I still had hours until check-in, and it was just a feeling, nothing to report. I told myself I was being paranoid. Still, I started marking my trail back with more flagging tape than usual. Every 20 meters, a bright orange strip fluttering in the breeze. I didn't want to take chances getting lost if I had to double back. I made it back to the boulder where I'd eaten lunch just after 4 p.m. The protein bar wrapper I'd stuffed in the outer pocket of my backpack was lying on the ground. I hadn't taken it out. My backpack had been zipped. I was sure of it. I didn't stop to think. I just started walking faster. Not running, but one notch below. I kept my bear spray in my hand now. I didn't care how it looked. Something was wrong. I'd been out in the woods alone plenty of times before. This was different. The woods felt off. It wasn't just silence anymore. It was pressure. Like the air itself was heavier. I felt eyes on my back constantly. Every time I rounded a bend in the trail, I expected to see someone standing there. I never did. Around 5:30, I passed the spot where I'd seen the first boot print. I stopped briefly just to check. It was gone. The mud was still there, dry and cracked, but the print itself had been smeared, like someone had tried to wipe it away. I didn't stop again. I kept walking. I kept my spray in one hand and the GPS in the other, eyes jumping from tree to tree, scanning for movement. At one point, a raven burst from a tree beside me, and I nearly screamed. My nerves were shot. I reached the trailhead around 6:15. My cabin was only a 10-minute walk from there. I didn't relax. If anything, I moved faster. When I came into view of the cabin, I stopped. The door was open, just slightly, but open. I hadn't left it that way. I felt frozen, staring at it from the edge of the clearing. The sun was still up, but it was low now, throwing long shadows through the trees. The cabin looked normal otherwise. No signs of damage. No tracks that I could see from where I stood. But that door, just ajar, felt like a scream. I backed away. Slowly. I made a wide circle around the cabin, moving quietly, watching every window. No movement inside. No sound. I stopped about 20 meters back, behind a thick stand of fir trees, and unhooked the satellite radio from my belt. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped it once before managing to press the power and tune to the emergency frequency. I gave a status update. Suspected break-in, possible person in the area, not feeling safe. Requested pickup. The response came a few minutes later. They'd send someone, but it would be at least 3 hours before anyone could reach me. Too remote, too few roads. I thanked them, crouched behind the trees, and waited. I didn't go near the cabin. I didn't go near the trail. I just stayed hidden, watching the clearing, heart thumping like a drum in my chest. The sun dipped below the horizon. The woods darkened. Still no movement. Then, just after 8 p.m., I saw it. A shape. A person.